say this, that if you're going to really meditate on Lam Rim, I just want to remind like why we're doing this actually is that, so like we're going to meditate on the stages of the path, that you have to create like a conducive environment and also like purify your negative karma and accumulate merit, and that helps you have success in your meditation itself. And so then traditionally you do some version of the 7 limbs which are in this practice. Like so you take refuge in every bodhicitta and then you do the 7 limbs. And so they're all here in this practice. So we have to do some practice for the 7 limbs. This is my personal favorite one. So might as well use it. And do people want to just read through it, or should we pause at each of the 7 limbs for a couple minutes to do it like a little longer? Maybe it's good to do this since we're doing a retreat.
Longer?
Right? Like,
yeah.
Because sometimes otherwise we just read it, but if you're not good at it, then it's hard to meditate while you're reading. So we'll pause at those certain points. But okay, so let's start at verse 1. Okay, so we're going to start off by taking refuge. So within great bliss I manifest as a Guru Yiram. From my clear body profusions of light rays radiate forth to the 10 directions, blessing the environment and the beings therein. All becomes most perfectly arrayed with only excellent qualities, infinitely pure. From the state of an exalted, white, virtuous mind, I and all mother sentient beings, as vast as space, from this moment until our enlightenment, go for refuge to the Gurus and the trees. So then pause there and just generate the mind of refuge, right? So the mind of refuge means like remembering at least briefly, we're going to meditate on it more later, but at least briefly remembering the nature of samsara, which we want to escape from. And then recognizing that we ourselves, just relying on our own ego, then it'll never happen. So you have to rely on, like who? In other words, who can teach you how to become free from samsara, right? Like the 4 noble truths we were talking about. So for sure it has to be the Buddha, who's actually liberated from samsara. The Dharma, right, which actually liberates us. Wisdom, the wisdom mind of the Dharma that actually liberates us, and then the Sangha, who are on the path and achieve levels of the path. And then here it includes the Guru also, because it's the Guru who teaches us the teachings of the Buddha. Right? So with that kind of thought in mind, then we can recite Namo Guru Bhye, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Guru Bhye, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Guru Bhye, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya. For the sake of all mother sentient beings, I transform myself into a Guru Yiram, and thus shall I lead all sentient beings to a Guru Yiram supreme enlightenment. For the sake of all mother sentient beings, I transform myself into a Guru Yiram, and thus shall I lead all sentient beings to a Guru Yiram supreme enlightenment. For the sake of all mother sentient beings, I transform myself into a Guru Yiram, and thus shall I lead all sentient beings to a Guru Yiram supreme enlightenment. For the sake of all mother sentient beings, I shall quickly in this very life, attain the state of a primordial Buddha, Guru Yiram. I shall liberate all mother sentient beings from suffering, and lead them to the great bliss of Buddhahood. To this end, I now shall practice the profound path of Guru Yiram Yoga. Om Om, Om Om. Pure clouds of outer and inner, secret offerings, objects invite us closer, the reaches of space, earth, and sky. Spreading out beyond the range of thought, essence there, pristine awareness, an aspect in our offering, and the various objects of offering. Their function is to generate the extraordinary pristine awareness of voidness and bliss as objects to be enjoyed by the 6 senses. Then if you visualize like your Guru or the Buddha in front of you, you can imagine him absorbing into light, dissolving into the point between your eyebrows, dissolving into your own body, filling you with like light and nectar. And then we're going to develop the visualization of the Guru Puja, which is actually this painting here. So if you have a hard time visualizing, it's the last one of that series. So, in the vast heavens of indivisible voidness and bliss, amidst billowing clouds of Samanta Vajra offerings, crest of a wish-granting tree, lush with leaves, flowers, and fruits, is a lion throne ablaze with precious gems, upon which is a lotus, sun, and full moon. On this sits my root guru, he who is kind in all three ways, in essence all Buddhas, an aspect a saffron robe monk, with one face, 2 arms, and a radiant white smile. Right hand is in the gesture of expounding the Dharma. Left hand is meditative pose, and cradles a begging bowl filled with nectar. Draped with 3 robes of lustrous saffron, your head is adorned by a pandit's gold-colored hat. In your heart, the all-pervading Lord Vajradhara, with a body blue in color, one face and 2 arms, holding Vajra and bell, embracing Vajradhatu Ishvari. They delight in the play of simultaneous voidness and bliss, are adorned with jeweled ornaments of many designs, and clothed in garments of heavenly silks. Radiant with thousands of light rays, you are emblazoned with the major and minor marks of Buddha, and sit in the Vajra position, and haloed by a 5-colored rainbow. Totally pure, your skandhas are the 5 Buddhas gone to bliss, your 4 elements, the 4 motherly consorts, the bliss of your senses, your energy channels, sinews and joints, are reality bodhisattvas. The hairs of your pores are the 21,000 arhats. Your limbs are wrathful protectors, light rays, directional guardians, lords of wealth and their attendants, all worthy gods that rid cushions for your feet. Surrounding you in their respective order is an encircling sea of actual and lineage gurus, yidams, hosts of mandala deities, Buddhas, bodhisattvas, viras, dakinis, and protectors to teachings. 3 doors of each are marked with the 3 vajras. From their syllables of hum, light rays go out and hook-like, draw forth from their natural abodes the wisdom beings so that they will become inseparably set. You who are the source of goodness, bliss, and perfection, the lineage gurus, yidams, 3 jewels of refuge, viras, dakinis, and dharmapalas, and protectors, entourage of the 3 times, by the power of compassion, come forth and abide steadfastly. Though all things are totally free of inherent coming and going, still you arise through your virtuous conduct of wisdom and loving compassion, in whatsoever form suits the temperament of varied disciples. O holy refuge protectors, please come forth with your entourage. Om Guru Buddha Bodhisattva Lama Pala Zapade Vare Za Om Bam Ho. The wisdom beings, symbolic beings become non-dual. We prostrate at your lotus feet, O Vajradhara Gurus, your jewel-like bodies through compassion bestow in an instant the supreme attainment of the 3 bodies and spheres of great bliss. They pause there actually. So this part, the prostration, right? This is the 7 limbs, right? And so remember, like the idea here is that right, you're thinking of like the Buddha, your guru, the Dharma, right? And actually, you're supposed to be thinking like the way you actually think, right? Is that so we visualizing? You know, if you can do the elaborate visualization we just read, great. If not, then just do simple one. You know, you can think of Lama Tsongkhapa, who's there, or of the Buddha, or of your teacher, or whatever. But the idea then, with this prostration verse, is that you're thinking in your mind, like it's not just, because if it's just a visualization, it doesn't have that much power, right? But what you want to think is that they embody, actually, right, all the wisdom that you're trying to actualize. Right? So there is, especially they embody the wisdom, understand, like bodhicitta, that it has infinite compassion, embracing all beings, that it's totally overcome self-cherishing. And they also have the wisdom, understanding emptiness that totally abandons ignorance, right? And so they also understand the nature of samsara, right, which we're going to meditate on today, right? And then how to become liberated from samsara. So you're thinking all that, right? So you're thinking, okay, otherwise it has no meaning, right? If you just have, like, if it's just random verses. So you actually have to think that way, right? Is that, and then what you're trying to actually think in a way is, okay, so they represent that. They represent an understanding of my condition and the condition of everybody I know and everybody I ever will know and ever have known, right? And then the path to become free from that. That's the point, right? How to actually become liberated. And so this visualization, like they represent, for me, right, that kind of wisdom. So you're thinking like that. And then the idea of prostration is a couple things. Well, one is, of course, you're showing respect to that wisdom, right? and the embodiment of that wisdom. But then also prostration, the idea there is also that you're trying to come closer to that. That's the symbolism of it. Does that make sense? So there's some sense of like faith and of like appreciation of, you know, of the wisdom itself, right? And then this idea of prostration is that you're prostrating in a sense symbolically trying to become closer to that state. That's the meaning of that in a sense. So I just think it's important to remember that. And then you can do, there are different visualizations you can do. You can imagine millions of bodies prostrating or all that. But the important, I think the important first step is to develop that sense of, you know, there was this famous, I'll just share it, like, because it relates to prostration. There was like one of the great yogis of Tibet, when he went to the Jokang temple, right? There's a famous statue. The most famous statue in Tibet is of the Buddha is there, and they say that he looked at that statue and he said, well, Buddha, like, you know, I still cherished myself and you cherished others. I kind of didn't. I still believed in. I was still ignorant. You overcame ignorance with wisdom. I guess you're worth prostrating to. That he is prostrate. It's like that kind of symbolism. So anyway, I just wanted to say that. Otherwise, it's like doesn't. Otherwise, it's just reading words. But so we can pick up again at verse 19. So that's what these mean, though, right? We prostrate your feet, O holy refuge protectors. You are the pristine awareness of all infinite Buddhas, playing the role of a saffron-robed monk as the supreme skillful means to appear in whichever way suits your disciples. We prostrate at your feet, O venerable Gurus, sole source of benefit and bliss without exception. You eliminate the root of all faults in their instincts and are a treasury of jewel-like myriad qualities. We prostrate to you, O benevolent Gurus. You are in reality all Buddhas, teachers of all, including the gods, the source of the 84,000 pure dharmas. You tower above the whole host of Aryas. With faith, esteem, and a sea of lyric praise, manifesting with bodies as many as the atoms of the world, we prostrate to you, the Gurus of the 3 times and 10 directions, to the 3 supreme jewels, and to all who are worthy of homage. So now comes the next limb, which is water. So we put water bowls out every class, right? So it's just important to know. Like, so the idea here again is, just to remind yourselves, right, that you know, like we put water bowls out, and then also here we're going to visualize offerings, right? You're going to visualize making offerings to the Buddha and Guru and all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So it's not like what do I say? You know, Buddhists, we don't think that the Buddha is like, when we have our eyes closed, is sneaking in to take a sip, right, of the water bowls. It's not that. The idea is that you're thinking, like a couple things. One is, so you're still thinking, right, this visualized in front of you is the embodiment of wisdom. So in some sense you want to make, first of all, so you're making offerings to that, right, to wisdom embodied. But then also it's a way of creating karma, right? The idea here is that you're trying to create positive karma. And one way, it's easy actually to visualize offering, because remember, generosity is in the mind, right? And we tend to be quite, what's the word, miserly and grasping, so we don't even want to give away like stuff we have. So it's easier, like they say, it's easier to start by giving away things that you're visualizing, because our ego gets less upset. And then if you get better at offering like that, then you naturally start actually giving away stuff, right? So the idea here is that you're trying to like train your mind to be generous. Does that make sense? And in this case, it's the visualized, refuge, merit field, they call it. But the idea is, you're training your mind in generosity here, right? So you're making offerings like that, and at least you don't regret making these offerings, because that's why do we offer water? Right? It's actually just because we're miserly, right? So it's something that we won't grasp at and think, oh no, I gave them all my water or something. Like, if you're more generous, then you give other things too, right? So our generosity is limited, so you give something, at least giving something. Does that make sense? Because we're training our mind to be more generous. So I just want to remind you why we're doing it. And then you're doing it to create merit so you can realize the path. Does that make sense? Okay. So, O refuge protectors, O venerable Gurus, together with your entourage, we present you with oceans of clouds of various offerings. From expansive, well-fastened vessels, radiant and precious, flow gently forth 4 streams of purifying nectars. Beautiful flowers and trees and blossoms with bouquets and garlands, exquisitely arranged, fill the earth and sky. The heavens billow with blue summer clouds from lazulite smoke, sweet and fragrant incense. Light from suns and moons, glittering jewels and scores of lamps, frolicking joyfully, dispel the darkness of 1,000 million billion worlds. Vast seas of scented waters, imbued with the fragrances of saffron, sandalwood, and camphor, swirl out to the horizon. Delicacies of gods and men, drinks and savories and feasts, ingredients of 100 flavors amassed at Mount Meru. Music from an endless variety of various instruments blends into a symphony, filling the three realms. Goddesses of outer and inner desirable objects, holding symbols of sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch, pervade all directions. To you, O refuge protectors, treasures of compassion, eminent and supreme field of merit, we present with pure faith Mount Meru, the four continents, a billion times over, the seven precious royal emblems, the precious minor symbols, and more, perfectly delightful environments and those dwelling within, and a grand treasury of all wishes and wealth, gods and men. To please you, O venerable gurus, we offer these objects, both actually arrayed and those in vision, as a pleasure grove on the shore of a wish-granting sea is strewn with thousand-petaled lotuses, captivating the hearts of all. These are the offering objects arising from Samsara and Nirvana's white virtues. Flowers, these are the virtues of the three gateways of ourselves and others, in this world and beyond. It is diffused with the myriad fragrances of Samantavajra offerings. It is laden with fruit, the three trainings, 2 stages, and 5 paths. We offer a libation of China tea, the color of saffron, steeped in the glories of 100 flavors, delicate bouquet, this, the 5 hooks, 5 lamps, and so forth, is purified, transformed, and increased into a sea of nectar. We offer even voluptuous, illusion-like consorts, a host of messenger dakinis, born from place, from mantra, and simultaneously born, having slender figures aglow with the vibrance of youth and skill in the 64 arts of love. We offer you supreme ultimate bodhicitta, beyond words, thoughts, and expressions, spontaneous and invisible, the void sphere of all things, free from mental fabrications of true existence, unobstructed great pristine awareness, simultaneous bliss. We offer you sundry types of potent medicines to cure the plagues of the 400 afflictions, and in reverence we offer ourselves as servants to please you. Pray keep us in your service as long as heavens endure. Before the eyes of those having great compassion, we lay bare with a mind of regret whatsoever non-virtuous actions bound to misfortune we have committed from beginningless time, cause others to do, or in which we have rejoiced, and we vow never to commit them again. So let's pause there, right? So that's the next limb. And so that's the limb of purification, right, or confession. And so the idea here, right, is that you actually think about, we all know how to do that, right? We've covered that in classes. But so you think about, so if we want to meditate, have success in our meditation, right, then if you have heavy negative karmas, then that blocks that. So since for the purpose of our meditation, we want to purify our mind, so you think about negative actions you've done. That harm yourself and harm others. On one level, that would be like the 10 non-virtuous actions. So if you've lied, used harsh speech to hurt other people, said divisive things that drive people apart, said meaningless stuff that wasted other people's precious lifetime, time of their life. If you've stolen, if you've killed, right? Not just killing human beings, but killing animals, killing insects, right? Killing any sentient being. If you've committed sexual misconduct. If you've developed, now these are more pervasive, right? If you've developed ill will. So just in daily life, every time you've gotten annoyed with somebody, and wished that, just had the thought of wishing to harm them.
if you developed craving, covetousness. If you've held wrong views. So as you think about those, of course, right, you've created so much negative karma. So you generate a sense of intelligent regret. Recognizing those kind of actions create the causes for suffering. I'm thinking, okay, so I'm engaging, I want to purify the negative karma. So I take refuge. The three jewels who can help me purify. For the sake of all sentient beings, I want to purify this so I can progress in my meditation today. To benefit myself and all sentient beings. So I'm going to engage in my practice today. I'm dedicating that to purify my negative karmas so I can progress on the path and be of benefit to others. As much as possible, I'm going to avoid doing those kinds of actions in the future. You just feel happy that you're purifying your negative karma. And let's read the next verse, verse 39. Though all things are like a dream, lacking inherent or natural existence, we sincerely rejoice in the happiness and joy of all Aryas and ordinary beings. Every white virtue has ever arisen. So there, hold on, let's pause. This one's really important. Is to rejoice. It's the easiest way to create good karma, they say. Right? So it's really important to rejoice there, to pause. And so you can actually start by thinking about. Let's start by thinking of the good actions of ordinary people. So everyone who does something, so you just think how wonderful, right? That, like how wonderful it is in the world, right? That there are people who are doing good things. There are people who are dedicating themselves to helping others. There are people who are striving to become a better person. And whether it's, people helping others who are sick, helping others who are dying, helping their neighbors, doing some kind of social service. So the good actions of all. For every person who with a sincere motivation, it is like teaching others. Or sincere motivation, all the people who are providing food and clothing to others, people who are providing medical care to others, nurses, doctors. And also everyone who's doing like a genuine, positive spiritual practice from any tradition. How wonderful that is. Everyone who's cultivating love, cultivating compassion. Everyone who practices patience, how wonderful. These things are wonderful, right, actually, right? If somebody's cultivating love or being patient rather than hateful, no doubt, right, that's a good thing. And people who are studying, learning, people who are contemplating and meditating. And we can rejoice also in the deeds of great bodhisattvas. the inconceivable actions of someone like the Dalai Lama. He travels all over the globe, continually working for peace, working for religious harmony, meeting with scientists to encourage them to study like things that will benefit others, and teaching like hundreds of thousands of people all over the world on every, on all different continents. And then all the other like great teachers, the great yogis who are meditating, like you rejoice in those who have understood emptiness. To the Aryas who have seen emptiness directly and are meditating on that. To those who realize bodhicitta and are dwelling in a state of great, universal compassion, universal responsibility, working for others. The deeds of all the Buddhas, the Arhats, Pratyeka Buddhas, just of all enlightened beings. And then also we can rejoice on our own virtues too. In our efforts to study, to meditate, to transform ourselves. In our own making of offerings, our confession, and all of our practices. How wonderful, how good that is. Then we can do verse 40. We ask that rains of vast and profound Dharma fall from 100,000 clouds, billowing with sublime wisdom and loving compassion, to nurture, sustain, and propagate the garden of moonflowers for the benefit and bliss of those limitless beings. So again, just good to pause very briefly at least. And, so thinking of the Buddhas and Gurus in front of you, and so requesting that whatever will most benefit others, may they teach that. Right? So we're requesting on everybody's behalf, right? So for those who are angry, may you teach patience. And for those who are hateful, may you teach patience. Everywhere in the universe. For those who are filled with excessive desire, may you teach content. For those who are overcome by ignorance, may you teach wisdom. Especially everywhere in the universe, to the extent of being's ability, may you teach, the wisdom of emptiness, the ultimate wisdom of the nature of reality. To all of us who are so self-centered, may you teach compassion, bodhicitta, right, that completely eliminates self-cherishing, replacing it with the cherishing of others from one's heart. And then may you teach the swiftest path to enlightenment for all beings, so that everyone, all of my mothers, everywhere in the universe, can swiftly be liberated. May you always teach everyone exactly according to their wishes. And even beyond their wishes, what they can't understand, may you help them understand it. So even just leading everyone perfectly. And may you also lead me, may you also teach me perfectly, so that I can progress along the path. So then verse 41. Though your Vajra body is subject to neither birth nor death, and is a vessel of unity's wish-granting gems, please abide forever, and in keeping with our wishes, pass not beyond sorrow until Samsara's end. So there also you can just think briefly, right, of particularly that you're asking, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, to live long. Khensur Rinpoche, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, to live long. Then all enlightened teachers, you're asking them, please stay in this world, which is lost in darkness. Please remain alive, teaching, healthy, to bring a lamp to this dark planet. So the beings kind of lost in ignorance, may you like stay alive and teach in order to keep the lamp of wisdom lit for us. And then verse 42. We dedicate the collection of white virtues thus created, that we be inseparably protected throughout all our lives by venerable gurus possessing the three kindnesses, and that we may attain the Vajradhara state of unity. We make our requests to you, O holders of the Elders Vinaya, O masters, second Buddhas clad in saffron, you brim with the treasury of jewels of much hearing, and our source of excellence and immense ocean of moral discipline. We make our requests to you, O Mahayana Gurus, Lords of Dharma, representing the victorious ones without exception. You possess the 10 qualities that render you suitable guides along the path of those who have gone to bliss. We make our request to you, O foremost holders of the Vajra. You are skilled in explaining and composing, are endowed with both sets of 10 qualities and a knowledge of Tantra and its rituals. You are honorable without pretense of guile, patient, broad-minded, with your 3 doors well subdued. We make our request to you, O compassionate refuge protectors. With precision you impart the good way of those gone to bliss, to the unruly beings of this degenerate age, where difficulties occur and were not tamed by the countless Buddhas of the past. We make our request to you, O compassionate refuge protectors. You enact the deeds of the victorious ones for the many beings who lack a protector refuge. At this time when the sun-like teachings of the sage are setting, we make our request to you, O compassionate refuge protectors. Even a single hair from your pores is for us a field of merit, more highly praised than all the victorious Buddhas of the 3 times and 10 directions. We make our request to you, O compassionate refuge protectors. The lattice of mirage-like skillful means, emblazoned with the 3 body wheels of those gone to bliss, you manifest as an ordinary guise to lead all beings. We make our request to you, O Supreme Gurus, essence of the 3 jewels of refuge, their aggregates, elements, sensory bases, and limbs, are in nature the fathers and mothers, male and female bodhisattvas, the miracle protectors of the 5 Buddha families. We make our request to you, O protectors of the primordial unity, foremost holders of the Vajra, all pervading lords of the hundreds of Buddha families, unfolding from the play of omniscient pristine awareness. You are the quintessence of 10 million mandala cycles. We make our request to you, Immaculate Samanta Vajra, who are in reality the ultimate bodhicitta, free of beginning or end, nature of all things, pervading everything in motion and at rest, inseparable from simultaneous bliss and play without obstruction. You are our Gurus, you are our Yidams, you are our Dakinis and Dharma protectors. From this moment until our enlightenment, we need seek no refuge other than you. In this life, the bardo, and all future lives, hold us with your hook of compassion. Free us from samsara and Nirvana's fears. Grant all attainments. Be our unfailing friend and guard us from interferences. You are our Gurus, you are our Yidams, you are our Dakinis and Dharma protectors. From this moment until our enlightenment, we need seek no refuge other than you. In this life, the bardo, and all future lives, hold us with your hook of compassion. Free us from samsara and Nirvana's fears. Grant all attainments. Be our unfailing friend and guard us from interferences. You are our Gurus, you are our Yidams, you are our Dakinis and Dharma protectors. From this moment until our enlightenment, we need seek no refuge other than you. In this life, the bardo, and all future lives, hold us with your hook of compassion. Free us from samsara and Nirvana's fears. Grant all attainments. Be our unfailing friend and guard us from interferences. So now you can just imagine that from the Guru Buddha in front of you, from his crown, white light radiate, like a beam of white light comes to your crown, with nectar kind of flowing along it, totally filling your body with white light and nectar. Completely purifying and blessing your body. Also purifying also like any ailments, any pains, any negative karmas of body. Transforming your body into a pristine body of light. And from your Guru Buddha's throat, a red beam of light comes to your throat, with red nectar kind of flowing along it, completely filling your throat and radiating out, totally filling your body with red light in the nature of enlightened speech. Purifies your any negative karmas of speech you ever create. Use an imprint for creating the Buddha's enlightened speech. Your body becomes the nature of completely like pristine, like rainbow-like red light, translucent, blissful, wisdom light. Then from your the Guru Buddha's heart, a beam of blue light comes to your heart, with blue nectar flowing along it, completely filling your heart, and filling your entire body with blue wisdom nectar, purifying any negative karmas of mind, leaving an imprint in Buddha's holy mind. And then all together at once, like the white from the crown, or white beam from the crown, the red beam from the throat, and the blue beam from the heart, reach your crown, throat, and heart, completely filling your body with like 3-colored rainbow light. And you can actually imagine your body like, totally filled with that. And then the Guru Buddha kind of floats to your crown. And he's like at your crown an embodiment of all wisdom, of all the Buddhas, all the Bodhisattvas. And think right then, like that you're making a supplication to that embodiment of wisdom. Saying, today I'm meditating on the nature of Samsara and Nirvana in order to develop the aspiration to enlightenment, to liberation. So please help me, please guide me, please bless my mind to have success in understanding accurately and correctly the nature of suffering, the nature of samsara, developing the aspiration to liberation. Now you can imagine that the Guru Buddha on your crown like smiles, is happy that you're striving in meditation, contemplation. And from his body now like a 5-colored beams come down through your crown. They're white, red and blue, also yellow and green. And 5-colored nectars are pouring down along those beams. You can imagine like from the soles of your feet upward, that your body is filled with that kind of 5-colored rainbow light, filling your feet, your calves, your knees, your thighs, filling your entire lower part of your body, your torso, then your torso, your chest, flows down your arms, filling your hands. You can imagine that now, like, you can actually imagine your hands, right, as in the nature of rainbow light. No longer solid, but kind of in the nature of wisdom light. Your arms, same thing. So your whole body is being transformed into this nectar light in the nature of enlightened wisdom. All the way up to your shoulders, your neck, your head, even your face. So now you still have a form, right? But that form is like translucent and made of light in the nature of wisdom. particular, like it's in the nature of the 5 wisdoms of a Buddha. And particularly, it's like it purifies any all negative karmas, all obstacles on your path. It blesses you to gain all the realizations from like the very first point of Lamrim to going to the Guru, all the way up to Buddhahood, all the way up to like the state of union with Buddha. And in particular, your mind is blessed to realize the nature of suffering, the nature of samsara, and to develop the mind renouncing samsara and definitely emerging towards the enlightened state, the liberated state. So that's like a really good preliminary to meditation. Then I have just a question for you guys, because now we'll meditate on the first point, but I want to ask, like, how much do you guys want, like a guided meditation versus just like saying, okay, meditate on this?
I like the guided.
You most like prefer more guided meditation? Okay.
Is that kind of like a cheating? I mean, if you're more advanced, you tend to not like guided meditations as much.
I guess some people who are very, like already very, very familiar, they'll be boring or something, or I don't know, like they already know. If you've already because part of it is like if you want to like let's say you're going to like we're going to start with meditation on the 10 types of suffering of the human realm. I want to start with that one because we can all relate to that more easily because it's our realm. It's our experience. Or some of these are more general, like the 3 types of suffering are not unique to humans. Humans experience them, but all beings experience them. But because my point is like, as your question is like, if somebody's like memorized all the outlines of those things and then like has meditated them extensively, then they can relate. Like the idea is you have to ultimately sort of relate it to your own experience, and sort of do that. So eventually, yeah, it becomes like but if we haven't memorized all the outlines and if we haven't done it a lot, then it does sometimes help to have somebody else sort of remind us how to do it. But also even like, I don't know, I think even sort of seeing it, sometimes though hearing somebody else's version can also give us new ideas. Mm-hmm. But ultimately we also have to relate it to our own experience, like, because we have our own, I don't know, yourself and people then you may also have a different take, so it's good to do that too. Mm-hmm. So feel free to elaborate in your own ways. But okay, so let's start with that then. So this is like meditating a little bit on the way the Panchen Lama describes like 10 sufferings of that, particularly describing it as in relation to the human realm, because that we can relate it to our own experience and it makes it more effective. And so okay, so we'll start with this. Like, so we're relating to. So you actually have to think. Okay, so I'm thinking about the suffering nature, samsara, right? But in particular in relation to my own life, right? So this life of mine as a human being. So actually, first of all, my life. Actually, we'll start with the suffering of birth. So we're starting at the beginning. And so, of course, I can't remember my birth, but there's no mystery what happens, right? I know what happens at birth, right? And so, of course, that happened to me, right? And so you imagine, first of all, like, let's start like a little before you actually came out of your mother's womb, right? So you were hanging upside down, most likely, right? Actually, if you're lucky, you were upside down, right? Which is not, and if you're unlucky, you were right side up. Neither one, as pressure started to form, right, to come out, right? Then you can imagine that wasn't a pleasant feeling. Actually, it's hard to imagine, right, how frightening that would have been. And then can you imagine, right, like, or his birth is a horribly painful experience for the mother, right? But actually for the child, it's both horribly painful and also totally confusing. Right? Like at least the mother knows, right? Kind of has some understanding, or has a clear understanding of what's going on, but the baby doesn't actually, right? The fetus, the young baby doesn't know what's going on. Right? And so it's like its head is being crushed, right? Your head was being crushed, right? That's what it would have felt like. Right? Your body was being like totally crushed, right, and pushed, and your mind would have been, would have been both feeling like, pain or discomfort, pain, and fear, like terror. Actually, is probably a better word. And so that whole process, just of being born itself, you'd have no idea what's going on. No idea what's next. Like at that age, you were too young to even think, "Wow, I'm about to die." But it would sort of feel like that. And then when the pain and crushing of birth itself ended, right? You would find yourself in like a totally confusing, overwhelming experience, right? Some kind of lights and sounds and physical feelings you've never felt before. If you were born in the US, right, there's a good chance it could have been in a hospital, right? Actually, the lights and sounds and so on of a hospital are disturbing, usually even for adults. So for sure it can't be, wouldn't seem entirely soothing to a newborn baby. So you contemplate until you can see, well, there's no doubt in my mind, actually, right? There is that, if I'm contemplating my own suffering, right, the nature of suffering of this realm, right, then I can say without any doubt, for certain, absolutely for certain, I and everybody I've ever met was born in a state of suffering. There's nobody for whom that was like just an entirely easy, unfrightening experience. So my birth into this body, in this life, was definitely in the nature of suffering. And actually quite intense suffering. Actually, like if somebody like, what's the word, put a 6-month-old baby through a similar experience of being like crushed and pushed, and actually it would be illegal. Right? It would be like child abuse. But we're all born that way. It's just the nature of life, right? There's no way around it. And actually, so like in birth, actually, without intending to, but just by nature, right? Like actually I caused my mother a lot of suffering, and I myself went through a lot of suffering. And that was like the nature of birth itself, right? There was just a lot of suffering. All the parties directly involved experienced a lot of pain. And that's the nature of this kind of human life. And so you contemplate that until you say, yeah, there's no way around it. Actually, that's true. There is the nature of human life is we're all born with some suffering involved. So then, having recognized there's no way around that truth, then we start to contemplate the suffering of aging. And so again, like, we have to start by thinking of our own experience. And actually, aging is not an easy experience either. Actually, technically, aging starts, at birth. Right? But so actually, even the process just of growing up is not entirely easy, is it? One can idealize. I mean, there's kind of positive memories from a child. We'll get to that, but in general, like growing up, actually, and sort of getting larger. Sometimes you want to be grown up when you're not. Then you get bigger, and then you wish you had what you had when you were younger. Right? Body changing is sort of at times overwhelming or confusing. And then, of course, we all know, right, that the older you get, then oftentimes become a result. Well, actually, it's not an easy process, right? Because as you continue to age, right, then you lose all kinds of abilities, right? Comes a point where you can't do things you used to do. Right? Your faculties, right? Your eyes often become less acute than they were. Eventually your hearing becomes less acute. Your ability to move becomes less acute. But if you look at aging, right, like actually if you walk around here, like actually in this building, right, there's like, if you just walk around this building, there's like all these different doctors' offices. Right? Actually for each different part of the body, right, there's like a scanning place for people who, because people have all kinds of problems, and there's all these different, right, just by the nature of getting older, there's all these problems that happen. Right? The other day as I was walking my building, I noticed there was like a spine and pain center. Right? I thought, wow, there's a whole office just for pain in the back, right? Because people get older and it degenerates naturally. Right? And actually then there's like so many chiropractors' offices everywhere. It's because so many people have problems. Right? And that's just part of aging. It's just a normal part of the process. Right? And as you get older and older, it gets worse and worse, actually. Right? So there's no way around that either. Right? Just by the fact of having been born, I can't escape those sufferings of aging. If I eat poorly, then I'm going to have all kinds of problems. If I eat well, that's better, but I'm still going to have all kinds of problems. If I don't exercise, it's quite bad. But even if I do exercise, then my ability to do that is going to get worse over time. For sure, it just gets more difficult and more painful to do things. Things I used to do easily, then or like if you look at little kids, they leap up, right, out of bed. Or if they're laying on the floor or something, right, then they leap up. And somebody in their 60s, you never see them do the way the child does. Right? It's impossible. And somebody in their 70s, somebody in their 80s. You can see how even just standing up becomes difficult. And then eating, right? When you're young, you can eat or drink more things. Then there comes a time, as you get older, right? And even just eating something, right, it leads to all kinds of problems. Right? Just the natural process of aging, right? Then even like going to the bathroom becomes an issue. So like all the ordinary things we do, right? Then like you may like a certain thing, but as you get older, right, then you say, oh, I like to eat that, but it's not good for my stomach. I like to eat that, but it's not good for my, other, whatever, different bodily systems. It's your ability to enjoy things. Right? and you recognize, again, so you're doing this meditation, so then you eventually recognize, wow, so like, just being born, right? Not just me, myself, for sure, this body, and then everybody I've known, right? Think of your own, like, parents and grandparents, right? Your aunts and uncles. People who, like, lost, you know, as they got older, also they lost their mental faculties, right? You know, everybody here is old enough, that you, first of all, have experienced some of that yourself in your body, and then also everybody here is certainly old enough to know other people, right? People who lost physical abilities, people who lost mental acuity, people who developed like age-related mental decline. And there's no escaping it, right? That's just the nature of being born in this. You look around and it's clear, right? There's no mystery. That's the nature of this kind of life. As soon as I'm born, I start like aging. Always my body is in the nature of change, right? It's changing instant by instant. And because of the nature of this kind of body that's created by karma and delusions, like my bones degenerate, right? So actually feel for a moment this issue of aging in terms of your own body, right? Even right now I'm aging, right, as I'm sitting here. And slowly over time, right, my bones, they degenerate. My muscles, they change. The bones and muscles of this body, then my internal organs in this body, they become less functional. My digestive system, my cardiac system, right, like my plaque builds up in these arteries of this body. My senses get less acute. My brain's, degenerates, right? So my memory gets worse over time. And so you're just relating this issue of aging, the suffering of aging, to yourself right now, right? Actually feeling it. This body right here, sitting, is like that. And if I live, then for sure, more sufferings of aging will come. There's no way around it, right? Eventually, right, for sure, either my mind won't be clear, my body will be stooped over, I'll need some kind of a cane just to stand up. If not one of those sufferings, another, right? In other words, one or another of those comes to everybody. Things that I enjoy doing now, I won't be able to do. And that's just my existential condition. The nature of this kind of life is like that. And I'm in it now. I'm aging now. Right this instant, this body is in that process of degeneration. You may have a feeling as you contemplate that, like almost of wanting to jump out of it or something, but you can't, right? There's no escaping it as long as you're as long as you're living an unenlightened life, you're in that, completely imprisoned in a body and a mind that degenerate. With birth, you were imprisoned in this kind of a system, which is samsara, right? Your own body and mind are samsara. So you're imprisoned in a system that gets older and degenerates. And right now is in the process of that. Right? You are that prisoner right now. Trapped in these samsaric aggregates, suffering now and heading towards more suffering. So then we're relating this to our own experience. We say, okay, so that actually already it starts to seem quite unpleasant, quite disturbing, somewhat frightening. But it's not only that, actually. Then the next suffering is the suffering of sickness. And so maybe I'm not sick right now, but again, actually, it's part of our it's part of my existential condition. Because you have to think for yourself about yourself, right? Is I do get sick, and I will get sick. In other words, because that's also the nature of this kind of human body. And so, right now you may have like a certain, like when you're feeling well, there's like a little bit of a feeling of confidence compared to when you're sick. But then if you just think about the sufferings of illness, right, which are inescapable. There's everybody who, if you live, the only escape from illness is death, actually. And so then just you think a little bit about, if I don't die today, if I don't die right away, then for sure I'm going to have to deal with the sufferings of illness. Right? And then I can think for myself, okay, so then there are certain kinds of illness, like temporary illnesses. Actually, even just having a cold is so unpleasant, right? Like where if you're coughing and your head's congested, you can't sleep at night. Even that's so unpleasant. But then the flu is even worse, right? So remembering what it's like, when you can't keep anything down and you're up all night, vomiting. When you can't breathe well because you're so congested and coughing. And then you're like desperate to try any kind of like medicine or home remedies, hoping it'll get better. But feeling like completely miserable in your body. But then there are so many other kinds of sufferings of illness. So we don't like to think about it, but the reality is, right, that those, one or more of those will come to, right? So the sufferings of like the person, right, who goes to the doctor, they're not feeling well, the doctor does some tests, right, and then the doctor says to them, you have cancer. Then they have to contemplate, right, like what kind of treatment do you do, surgery or chemotherapy or radiation. The sufferings of heart disease, right, you're having to have like painful, like open heart surgeries, where you may die, you may live, you may never be the same again. Same with cancer, of course, right? But then there's so many other illnesses, right? All these degenerative illnesses. Lou Gehrig's disease, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease. They're like, when you think about them, right? Even the names of these things are like frightening, like almost horrifying. Right? Those kinds of diseases where a person's like trapped in their body but can't move, paralyzed. They know it's fatal, but it can take a long, slow process. And then there are other diseases like pancreatic cancer where it's faster, but still horrifying, right? Painful death, or liver cancer, these different kinds of, there are different kinds of cancers that kill people in different ways, right? Some are slower, some are faster. And so when you think just having a body, right, then we're all subject to one or another of those. Right? Obviously nobody gets every disease, but everybody gets some diseases if they live long enough. And so I and everyone I care about, all my friends, my family, and myself, right? And whether it's people older than me or younger than me, we're all going to get sick. And so like now you're thinking, right, I was born in suffering. I'm trapped in the suffering of aging that's unescapable. Except, Well, actually, except I die and then I get reborn and then start aging again. It's the same difference. And then there's these like horrible sufferings of illness. And actually, it's almost hard, I think, if you know, to keep your mind holding on to the fact, right, that, well, this body I'm in will have some of those experiences. And everybody I love and care about will have some of those experiences. Right? You know, so either my loved ones will be watching me also, right, when I'm sick, or I'll be watching them when they're sick. Right? Going to doctors, going to treatments, dealing with all kinds of like the horrible, you know, it's like to not have any treatment is horrible, but then to get treatment is horrible. Right? And like all the side effects of many of those kinds of like treatments are just like horrific, actually, right? Oftentimes it's like that. Right? So you have to have the horrible suffering of the disease and then also like the horrible sufferings of the treatment to the disease. Right? All these people, like when sometimes you take antibiotics even, right, and then they have horrible reactions to antibiotics. Right? Developing hives, or developing rashes, or developing vertigo, or developing, you know, delirium, or like delirium symptoms, all these kind of horrible things that happen. And so I can't escape that. As long as I'm unenlightened, I'm going to continue to face aging, sickness, and then the next kind of suffering, death. So as soon as I was born, death was inevitable. Nobody escapes death. Everybody dies. I will also die. And then you have to be honest with yourself, right? Will my death be pleasant? Not very likely. Most people, right, die with some kind of pain, fear. So my existential condition's like that. I'm going to die. Before I die, I'll go through, if I have a long life, right? Actually, if I have a short life, that's totally tragic. If I have a long life, right, then I face all those sufferings of repeated experience of illness, aging. So now, just those first 4 sufferings, you should start, you know, the goal is you contemplate them in relation to your own experience until you start to feel, wow, if the Buddha is right, that there's a way to be free from those, to not have to be subject to this kind of existential situation. How nice that would be. This is really like, actually, you know, what do we not like about a prison, actually, right? Is that you're not totally free, right? You can't do whatever you want. And the worst thing is like a death row, right? Well, okay, in a sense I'm on the death row. I'm, you know, and there is with these aggregates I'm like a death row inmate, right? There is, I'm going to die, and I'm going to go through all kinds of these experiences of aging and sickness before I die. Okay, so then we're going to staying with these 10 types of suffering. We're going to focus now on even you know, when I'm sick, I actually can't do anything. Oftentimes I just like lay there, just miserable. Sometimes you can't even lay there, right? Like you have to keep going, whatever. Or actually, if you have some kind of stomach ailment, you keep going to the bathroom and back, right? Or if you're some kind of illnesses, you can't lay still because your body's in so much pain, so you're moving one way and another trying to get comfortable. But then, when I'm not sick, I have some kind of like health. Then you might want to escape from the awareness of suffering by saying, well, then everything's great, actually. You know, compared to sickness, right? Then when I'm healthy, it's great. But actually, you know, when you see somebody who like was in a sickness, right? Then like for a day or two, actually that's the suffering of change, right? There is you know, if a person couldn't eat, right? And then, or just like you couldn't breathe easily, then for like 1 or 2 days you think, wow, just breathing nice, it's great. Right? But then after 2 days, you don't still, even just a day or two, 3 days, nobody says that 3 days later. Right? Or if you couldn't eat, then for a day or two, it's like, wow, I can eat again. I'm feeling better. Then after a few days, you forget, like you take it for granted. You don't keep appreciating that. That's the suffering of change. In other words, when you're having a certain kind of, I'm jumping into another thing, right? But when you were having some kind of intense suffering, then when that lets up, you call that happiness. But actually, that's just, that you were freed from a specific suffering of an intense illness, let's say. So you feel some relief. But that's just the relief of escaping one suffering until you start to notice other problems. Okay, then in my life there's this, I want to start with this one, there's a suffering of, I call it like going to search, right, or seeking things. So my whole life actually, when I've not been laid out sick, or, laid out by some problem related to aging, then it's just that, right? So what happened, take the example, right? So like you felt at a certain point, okay, I need a career, I need some kind of work. Again, it's the nature of this kind of life, right? So first, like, what was my experience, right? So first there's some kind of worry and anxiety. Well, what will I do? How will I find something? Will it work, right? Can I figure out something that I'll be capable of and not hate, right? And so there's like a kind of difficult process of picking something to try to do. And then if you look at life on this planet, your own life, right, then sometimes, like, one tries to do something and fails. Whereas you set out and then you just can't do it. Other times, like, it takes a lot of effort, right? Like getting education. You think to like sometimes you may like certain classes, but other times there are things you have to study and do to prepare, or like training, and different like experiences along the way to get a career that are quite difficult, right? And everybody knows that, right? So they say you have to pay your dues, right? Or something like that. And then it's often quite difficult to get enough, right? To make enough money. So you look around, right? And like on this planet actually, there are so many people. Actually, so if we actually contemplate just this one of going to, like, seeking out, right? So first of all, like with seeking out, we'll start with seeking out enough wealth to live, right? Then there are so many places on this earth where one can't actually, right? There's one can barely survive, right? Or even like, like you think of all the like how many refugees are there, in different places, right? Right now it's like many coming out of, like in Syria, right? But always on this planet, there are so many places where there are like refugees. Then there are like so many people in countries that are like occupied or something. So it's like oftentimes it's so difficult. Like if you go to places, many places on this planet and look, right, it's like unbelievable hardships to just like seek out enough for anything, actually. Actually, especially like if you think of the most populous countries, right, it's unbelievably difficult. Now here in this body, right now, right now I happen to be in this body here in the Washington, D.C. area. It's actually relative to what goes on this planet, I'm in one of the easier places, actually, right? Like I'm not in a famine, I'm not a refugee, like running away from someone who's trying to kill me. Right now here in this body, right, like I'm not in some country where there's like, the economy's completely devastated. And there's just no jobs, right? I don't have that kind of situation. And yet still, like I'm one of the most fortunate in terms of just like not being in those situations, right? Not being some like subsistence farmer in China whose land is being taken over by the government, is told, like, you have to move. or somebody who's, there's a drought, my whole region like has no food. I don't have that kind of problem, and yet still it's quite difficult. Right? We're just trying to so like you seek out, right? Like so I seek out a job. Right? Then like there's like a lot of stress in trying to get a job, right? If you don't have a job, then it's quite stressful and frightening, right? You feel powerless, like you can't just force someone to give you a job. You can't, especially if you're in this area, right? Like it's quite slow oftentimes, like with bureaucracies. And then you finally get a job, right? And then sometimes you have a boss who's like a complete mean to you, right? Who doesn't treat people nice. Oftentimes also like the agency itself or the organization is like, seems like it's run poorly, right? And then you can become like so upset, so angry, right? Oh, why are they doing that? That's so stupid. Right before you didn't have a job, it was like terrible. Oh no, I'm not gonna have any money. I can't. What am I gonna do about my house or my rent or my whatever? My living, right? Then you get the job, and then like so many times, right? Either the boss is not good, or coworkers aren't good, or the organization seems like it's run stupidly. Then after a while, there's no appreciation. Oh, thank goodness, I just have a job at all. But there's this feeling of incredible frustration, sometimes like extreme anger. Why are they doing this? They're so stupid. You can't stand it here anymore. It's almost unbearable, but I have to go in. Then you may have like a commute, right? The difficulty of commuting to work. And the difficulty if they demand extra hours and so on, right? If their schedule is not convenient, they don't give much vacation, things like that. Right? So right here, I'm in one of the most fortunate situations, and yet, others are suffering much worse than me and trying to seek out just their subsistence. And yet still, it's totally, like, I'm one of the luckiest on this planet, and yet it's unbelievably, so much suffering is involved, so much dissatisfaction. Right? And then I look around me, and other people, right, there's so many people who, like, they're living lives of what we call, like, quiet desperation, actually. They're going through the motions. They're just, like, putting in their time, right? How many people say they're putting in their time now, just waiting to retire or something like that? They feel it's like totally meaningless, boring, but they have to do it. Then like the same kinds of processes apply, right, to seeking out also like whatever you want. So say like people seeking out a partner. Then that can be like, so, like actually if you think of like, if you just think of like the stress of when you're like a teenager or a young adult, just trying to like with the whole dating thing, it's quite, how much anxiety, or like worry. So like you don't have somebody, then you feel, like actually in our society especially, right? I think if somebody, sometimes there's this thing if somebody doesn't have anybody, like, if you're young and then growing up, right, then there's like, it feels like something wrong, right? It can seem like there's something wrong with you. And then there's the stress of trying to find somebody. Then sometimes like the person you like, they don't like you. Then that's quite painful. Then there's the stress of like, will they like me? Then if you start to date somebody, there's like the whole thing of, well, they didn't call, or they didn't smile, they didn't look at me this way, they didn't respond that way. So there's like all this kind of like worry and concern and discomfort. Then there's like some excitement, but then however much excitement there is, then there's that much also fear about like what's next. So I'm just going to connect together a number of these different types of suffering. Right? So then along the way, right, as you're doing these things, right, this is when I'm healthy. So when I'm sick, again, remembering, birth was, for me, right, we're each saying that, for me, birth was definitely unpleasant. Aging is not a fun thing. Severe illnesses, like that, feeling sick is terrible. But then for the most part, when I'm healthy, right, whether it's like money or food or friends or lovers or whatever, like the whole process actually is like that, right? So there's like this whole thing of I don't have what I want, right? And then there's like what's wrong, and what do people think of me, and will I ever get something that I want? Then there's like all the hardships of trying to get what I want, right? And then if I get what I want, then there's the anxiety about losing it, right? If you finally like get a job and build up a little bit of wealth, right, then you have to worry, right? Well, how do I invest it? Maybe I'll lose it. Maybe the stock market will go down. But then if the stock market will go up, you know, I'm not investing in it, then I'm an idiot. If I invest it and it goes down, then I was an idiot. You know, so you can't win there, right? I buy a house, well, will the market go up or will the market go down? Right? Will somebody steal what I have, right? You finally find like a partner, well then what if they leave me? What if they have an affair? What if they lose interest in me? And then also, like, actually nobody remains completely satisfied, right? You look around, right? People who, even like people who have, actually this is very true, as American, in America here, it's easy to see, right? Even people who have like millions of dollars, they want more money. Even people who have like, you know, beautiful stuff, they want something else. They're always dissatisfied, wanting more. And so they're always having to like try to find something better. And then also we can't, another suffering is we can't escape, no matter, we can't escape coming across things we don't like. Right? And so actually it's like horrible, right? In other words, they're like, you know, we don't want to be around certain kind of people, but still we have to be around those kind of people. Right? Sometimes people treat us badly, you know, but you can't, even if you escape from one person like that, then there'll be somebody else. And also like, you know, if there are certain things you like hearing, then there will be other news you don't like hearing. Also like, there will be weather you don't like, storms and things like that. Natural disasters will come. So you might think, okay, well, don't go south, like towards Florida and the coast, because it'll be hurricanes. Well, go inland, but then there are tornadoes. We'll go to California where the weather is quite nice, there are no hurricanes, well then there's earthquakes. Like there's no refuge, there's no, the point is that as you contemplate this, there's like no place to go, right? If I can get a job where I don't have many coworkers, then I might feel lonely. If I get a job where I have a lot of coworkers, then there will be like some very annoying people there. If I don't have a partner, then I'll be lonely. If I have a partner, then there will be like all kinds of conflicts and demands and problems. If I don't have a job, then I have this incredible stress and worry about having enough money. If I do have a job, then there's always like some problem, right? Too much work, too many difficulties there. And then I finally get something and I feel a little bit satisfied with it, I'm worried I'm going to lose it. And then eventually, of course, I do lose it. And so actually there's nothing I can accumulate that's I can reliably keep. There's so many people who'd build up some wealth, then they lose it all. If I don't lose the wealth in this life, then I will lose it when I die anyway. Same thing with a partner. Like if you finally find somebody where you're kind of satisfied and feel, oh, she's pretty good. Well, then it's, you know, you're going to lose them anyway. Actually, you know, if they don't leave you and lose interest, or you don't, you know, get dissatisfied with them, right? Then actually they could die any time. You know, you could die, of course, but if you don't, then they could die any time. Right? And then there's like the incredible suffering, right, of losing that person. It's like everything I accumulate, I'm going to lose over and over. And like you look around, right, and that's the situation of everyone I know, actually. My parents went through so much suffering. My grandparents before them also went through so much suffering. So many difficult experiences. My cousins have been through so many problems. My aunts and uncles also, right? Right? There's incredible suffering. When somebody wants a child and can't have one, it's like terrible. But then if you watch somebody who's had a child and the child dies, it's like unbearable actually, right? Totally unbearable. And nobody wishes for that, and yet it happens all the time. Whether, children die of cancer, or sometimes their children are soldiers and die in wars, or murdered, or they get illnesses, other illnesses and die. So like it's totally unbearable when you look at that, right? Look at all the people who want children can't have them. Then you look at people who had children, they die, and the person's like totally devastated. You look at the people who don't have enough money, right? And you think, wow, it's like unbearable. Then you look at people who had money, right? And someone like Bertie Madoff or some other scam and they lost it. And you think, which is worse? It's almost hard to tell, right? Actually, both seem like horrific, just horrific. And then you say, well, one person's lonely, and they've lived their life and they don't have a partner or something and they're depressed. It's terrible. But then you look at somebody who loves somebody and they have a chronic illness and the incredible stress of taking care of that, of worrying about the person, of the conflict and the tensions that come from that. You look at the sufferings, right, of when people are living together and there's horrible tension and difficulty in the home, right? Whether it's between married couple or between parents and children. Or then if there's not that, right, and then the child, if parents love their child, then the child becomes an addict or something like that, and so much incredible suffering. Or if the parent has an addiction, then they affect the children. Just when you look around at just the people in our neighborhoods, I'm talking about, right, all around us. Actually, we don't ordinarily want to think about it, but if we do, then it's terrible, right? We talk about the suffering of our own illness, but then the suffering of the illness of other people, right? If it's your child, or your spouse, or your parent, right? And then knowing how to help them and how to take care of them. And the idea here is that we're recognizing this is my suffering, but this has happened endlessly and beginninglessly, right? Actually, I have one of the best lives. According to Buddhism, this human body is the best kind of life I've ever had. I have one of the best human, whereas it's very rare to be a human being. Almost no sentient being is human like I am. Right? Almost all the insects, and almost everybody on this planet is insects and things. I'm human. And I have one of the best human lives on this planet, right? Whereas for sure I have more opportunities than almost anybody else. I have such a lucky situation right now, because of these circumstances of this birth. And yet it's almost unbearable. There are times where it's hard to even bear, to see the suffering of myself and the people around me. You can go to downtown DC and you can see neighborhoods where there's more violence, and it's almost unbearable to think that. But then sometimes just in our own neighborhoods, right, there are people who are quite, seem quite successful, and they kill themselves. They're so unhappy they actually kill themselves. It happens all the time, right? They're among people like us, because it's they find life so unbearable. So anyway, then also, like, for sure I'm going to meet with all kinds of difficult circumstances. Even if I plan well, and so on. There will be economic crises, there will be like wars, terrorist attacks, right? You look at human history, there's not, actually, sometimes we think, oh, it's terrible, right, what's happening now. But actually, there's no period where it didn't happen. So these things will keep happening in my life. If there's not terrorist attacks, there will be wars. If there's not wars, there will be conflicts. Where there's no declaration of war, whatever. It's just it keeps happening. It's the nature of this planet, right, of this life. And then whatever I accumulate, I'm going to lose it. Many things I'll lose while I'm alive, and then the few things I don't lose at some point while I'm alive, like my health or those things you lose eventually. But if I hold on to a few things, then I'll be grasping at them when I die. And this is all my existential circumstance. And finally, we contemplate, and that's because I have these kinds of aggregates, this kind of body and mind. I have this unenlightened body and mind that were conditioned by karma and delusions. And because I have this, right, this body, this kind of mind, that grasps at things, right? I have a body that's conditioned by karma and delusions, so it was born and it will die, it'll get sick, it'll go through all kinds of problems. And I have a mind that grasps at myself as truly existent, inherently existent, grasps at every kind of object, right? So I don't want this, and I do want that, and I want this for dinner, and I don't want that, and then I eat this that I wanted, and then either it doesn't taste so good, or it does taste good, and I eat too much of it, and I get too full, and it's just the nature of my mind, right? I have this kind of mind that's never happy, never satisfied. It's a samsaric mind, actually. All the time, like I'm craving after something or wanting to avoid something. And like, my mind is like totally untamed, totally crazy, actually. One analogy in Buddhism is that you think like my mind is like a crazed elephant, like a crazed elephant in that's just stomping around, knocking everything down. I have that kind of mind. Or another metaphor they use is like a monkey, right, that's out of control, grabbing at everything, knocking things over. But that's what my mind is like, actually. Because I look at myself and I have to say, okay, my body for sure is in the nature of suffering. Right? It's born in suffering, it ages in suffering, it gets sick in suffering, and it dies in suffering. I can't deny that. But my mind also, because it's untamed, is a totally samsaric thing. Day and night I want something, I don't want something, like I have something, I'm afraid of losing something, I'm grasping at something, and then like I feel jealousy, I feel anger, I feel fear, I worry about stuff. I try to meditate to like calm my mind down, and I think, oh, I'm not a good meditator, right? Like, so whatever I do, it's suffering, right? There's always going to be some kind of problem. As long as I have this kind of mindset that grasps at a truly existent I, a truly existent mind, I'm going to suffer. And actually, and my suffering will only be worse than now. In other words, right now, I'm a human being in a good circumstance, who has access to Dharma, has friends, has enough to live. And so it's like, even when I'm going through it, if I look at this body and this mind, it's unbearable, or it's not satisfactory, it's not okay as it is, and I'm in the best circumstance. It's only going to get worse if I don't become enlightened, if I don't become liberated. And so by contemplating these 10 types of human suffering, one develops gradually this kind of feeling or recognition. I don't any longer want to be trapped in this kind of circumstance. Although I have a habit of thinking, if I just get this, if I just have some chocolate cake, I'll be okay. If I can just watch my favorite movie, I'll be okay. If I can just get a better job, I'll be okay. If I can just go out with my friends, I'll be okay. Or go to the beach or something. And not that those things, we're not judging those things or saying they're bad, but it's like, I won't be okay, actually. Those aren't a solution to my problem. I'm trapped in a prison of unenlightened body and mind. So I have to develop the antidote to that. It's a disease, actually, right? So one metaphor is like, I think I have a disease of samsara, and I have to take the medicine to cure this disease. Up until now, I'm like a crazy person who had a disease but never even noticed it. So, like, even though the cure exists, I wasn't trying to seek it out. I was insane, actually. Right, grasping at things that only bring me pain. I was like, chasing after the very causes of my own suffering. Like a totally insane person. But I want to have sanity now. Which means I want to take the cure. Or the other metaphor, right? It's like I've been in prison, right? I'm in prison in this body that's aging, this mind that's always grasping. Right? This is a prison, this kind of body and mind. And the Buddha has offered me a key, actually, right, to get out of this prison. And it's actually not even that difficult, right? Just the 3 higher trainings. Right? So it's just ethics, meditation, and then wisdom, right? The wisdom of emptiness. It's actually so easy. Right? The Buddha made it like so easy to get out of this. So it's like I'm a person in death row, right? Somebody's offering me a key. I mean, how insane would I have to be to say, oh, I like, that I like the boiled potatoes in this prison, so I'm not leaving. It'd be totally like crazy. So now I feel like this is the time, right, to get out. I have the right kind of mind, human, right? I have the right kind of body, human body. There are teachers. Right? There's the teachings themselves. I have a brain that works okay. And so I could actually be liberated from this, right? Where I don't have to be born with my head crushed and my body in pain. I don't have to be sick and aging, die, and spend an entire life after life after life, endlessly chasing after stuff, losing things, being unhappy, being dissatisfied, being angry and jealous and fearful and anxious and sad. I can just turn the key, use the key of wisdom, right, to turn the lock and walk out of the prison of samsara. So one develops a feeling, wow, I really would like to do that, an aspiration. The purpose of my existence is to become free from this. If I don't, if I have this disease of samsara and I don't take the medicine, right? Or from this prison of samsara and I don't use that key to open, if I just put the key under my pillow and the prison caught, like there's nothing stupider than that. So one develops like an aspiration, or better if you can, a resolve. I'm going to do that. Like I will take responsibility to free myself. I'm not going to be like, let my ignorant habit trick me into believing that it's okay to remain in the prison of samsara on death row. Just chasing after more causes of suffering. I refuse to do that, since I have the opportunity for something else, where I'm free from the sufferings of birth, aging, sickness, death, chasing after stuff, losing what I have, not getting what I want, having all kinds of bad things happen to me, and having unenlightened aggregates of body and mind. So since liberation from that is possible, then for sure I'm going to do that. I'm dedicating myself to achieving liberation. from this horror show, this prison. So just dwell for a few minutes now, in silence, in that aspiration for liberation. So I just want to give a few minutes, like before we take a break, just to see if there are comments or questions about that process of meditating. That's just one of the, right, the list of 10. There are other ones, the 6 and the 8 and the 3. I think we'll do the 6 and then, to people also, I was thinking either we could just keep with the different lists of sufferings, or we can go through the 12 links. We're going to do another retreat next time, so do people want to do the 12 links today, or should we do that next week?
12 weeks today.
Okay, so we'll do both.
Can you repeat the 10 ones? Yes.
So the first 4 are birth, aging, sickness, and death, right? That's one set of 4. And then actually, the next 4 come from the list of 8. So those are, you meet with unpleasant things, you are separated from things you like and had before, you don't get things you want, right? So sometimes you, even when you seek things, you don't get them. And also you have 5 contaminated aggregates. So that's 8, right?
Yeah.
And then for the 10 that the Panchen Lama wrote, he added 2 more, which are that you. One is that you that going to search one, that you know the seeking out, the suffering of just seeking itself, seeking things, and the other one was he differentiates 2. He actually subdivides one. Usually in the 8 there's separation from the pleasant, and then he also like he does another one which is sort of like should I say this right? That he call the way I had it translated was like losing everything. That's the way I had it translated. Like sort of that that you know, even losing your body, losing you know, just losing that because of impermanence, and or is it suffering of impermanence in a way. And so he does that. He adds 2 more, but also he relates them particularly. He advises relating those 10 to specifically to human suffering, whereas in the other Lamrim texts they give those 8 as suffering of all the higher realms, which they do to apply to all the higher realms. But he says if you relate it to your human life, you'll feel it more. It's a good starting point, he said, because you know we do need to contemplate the suffering of the God realms, for example, but they're a little less familiar to us. So it's more powerful to start with the sufferings of the human realm, because we can relate more easily. Maybe I'll ask you guys a question too, like, because sometimes remember we were in those discussions about like, actually everybody was participating, but you had started that discussion about realization. I guess what I want to ask is like, do people see how like, because I mean one really good thing about this topic is that it's so grounded in our own experience, right? And not just of ourselves, but of our, like, you know, it's our own experience of ourselves, but also like I was trying to say, if you elaborate, right? If you think of your parents, or if you have children, your children, if you have siblings, if you have cousins, if you have aunts, uncles, like, and there is, where it's easy to see, right? Like, whereas if you have a hard time, you know, if you're not old enough to really experience, to have a good appreciation of the sufferings of aging, well, you don't have to be that smart to look at, you know, well, gosh, like, you know, I look a little like my parents and grandparents, and what happened to them, and was it all pleasant? You know, and the truth is no, right? Like, it's not hard to figure that out, right? And like, you know, and if you go through your family just, right, like how did everybody, you know, what has everybody gone through, right? If you just go through lists like that, right, and contemplating this, right, okay, so like, you know, one person lost a child, somebody else, when they were young, lost their parents, somebody else, like, got this disease, somebody else got that, you know, my dad got this disease, my mom didn't get that one, but she has the other one, my grandfather had a different one, and my other grandfather had the stroke, and my other, you know, like, there was like, you just go through it, and it's not hard to see it, right? And some of them, when you think about, you know, if you think of like somebody who had a stroke, or somebody who had like, and then you think of what their experience was like, and then you think, well, it's my relative, it's not that different, you know, like, it's not that hard to see, well, gosh, you know, maybe I'll die young, or maybe I'll have something like that. If I don't have that, then the other side had cancer, right? Like, I guess my point is, I'm just giving an example, right? And then you apply it to the other ones, right? About like losing what you have, right? Like, and if you apply it, like, whereas these things are not, one is they're really, really easy to see the truth of, right? Because, you know, if you say, well, was there anybody who just like had it really easy the whole time? Like, no, right? Like, did I ever tell you here that story? I always remember, it struck me, I remember this, the famous story, I guess it's partly, I thought of this, it's the story of the Buddha, but I always related to it because, recently, actually, I'll just share this, this is not Buddhist, but just my own reflection, for my work as a therapist. I was thinking, the other day I was thinking this, I thought the worst suffering is the worst suffering, I mean, I've seen a lot of suffering every day, it's my job, but the worst is losing a child, it seems, like a mother, particularly, is worse than fathers, that's my experience. And I thought, and the worst fear is when people are afraid they're losing their mind. It seems like those are the worst fears. But then I was thinking of, there's a famous story where a woman who had lost her child was carrying the corpse around because she couldn't let go, which I can imagine from having worked with mothers who've gone through that. And she came to the Buddha holding the corpse and said, she said, bring my baby back to life. People know that story, right? And the Buddha said to her, she said, I heard you're enlightened, you should be able to do miracles, bring my baby back to life. And the Buddha said to her, now this is in India where people live, families stay in the same house. It's not like America where you build new houses every, like here, whatever, in Northern Virginia there could be a house that people have only lived in for a year. There it's like, people live there for generations. So it's not just a year. And the Buddha said, if you can bring me a cup of rice from a house that has not experienced a comparable suffering, I'll bring your baby back to life. And so the lady started traveling from house to house, just started going everywhere, to every house, carrying the big corpse of her baby and saying, has your family ever had any tragedy? I'm looking for a family that's never had any suffering. And of course, after a long time going from house to house, she came back. I think she buried, or I guess in India you cremate people. So I think she cremated the baby at that point and came back to the Buddha and said, I failed, to find a house where nobody had experienced tragedy and sorrow. And at that point she realized renunciation, what we're working on. Like she had already realized it. And she said, I want to become liberated. She said, I know you can't bring my child back to life, and I know that that's not the nature of this kind of existence, so I want to achieve liberation. And then she achieved liberation. I believe my recollection, I think she achieved enlightenment, or like liberation from samsara, arhatship, I think in that life. Or at least became an arya, so I forget. She gained high realization. But my point is like, one is that's an interesting, it's true story of the Buddha's time, but the point is like, it's not so hard to realize this one, right? Like, it's because you come across things like that all the time. And so I think that like this particular contemplation, if you meditate on it, in the way we just did, right? You do the blessing, you have to do the 7 limbs, and that's the traditional way to do it. It's good to do, you should do it that way. But, because some topics like emptiness are quite difficult, right? Because you have to, in other words, like, they're hard to realize because they're abstract, and it takes like, they're not, like, even though we are empty, they're not close to our ordinary experience of things. Whereas this is our ordinary experience of things. It's just we're in denial or we don't look at it. And so my point is like, if somebody were to meditate on this regularly over and over and then go around, the key would be you would meditate on it every day. Like let's say you were meditating on this twice a day like we just did, right? And then if when you walk around the day you just think about that, like you just look at people, I'm not talking about like some kind of abstract thing, but you look at people and you actually recognize, wow, like, this person has this person, and you relate it back. And there are texts in Buddhism where they say, wise people when they hear of others, actually there are 2 things. One is they hear of others suffering. There's 2 things. One is to have compassion for that other. But the other is to relate that suffering back and say, I'm no different, right? Which also helps. It helps with compassion, but it also helps with this realization. So like Arya Deva in his 400 verses says if you go to a funeral and you don't recognize that like the person who died and you were the same, then you're stupid or something. He doesn't say it that way exactly, but that's the point. Like.
What does he mean by that?
What he means is like you should recognize that like you're changing moment to moment, just like that person was. You'll die also just like them, and that if you feel different from them, like that often we have this intuitive feeling like that I'm here and I'm not really subject to that. There's some kind of a subconscious habit that we have of not recognizing that how we also are changing every instant and subject to death.
You mean like somehow we feel we're exempt from what others. There's a complex called that. You may know the term, but there's this complex in psychology that talks about where you think that it's not going to happen to you.
Yeah, it's a form of narcissism, really. Yeah. And and so this is just cutting through that, and saying, no, I'm subject to everything that everybody else is.
Can I just make a comment? You mentioned earlier about the fact that our minds are like the elephant and the monkey. And what I realized this week is that because I've been reflecting on the satisfactions of samsara for a very long time, but I realized that unless it's accompanied by some type of training of the mind. So I was reading a book that you recommended to Distilling the Mind, the quiescence one.
Oh yeah.
I've been reading that this week, and I've been trying it, and I smiled to myself when you said, well, you sit down to meditate and you feel like you can't do it because your mind is so wild. And in this book, he helps you see that it's actually a matter of it's not only weeks or months; it could be years before you can even have that type of focus that can even last for. Alan Wallace said that it took him, because I have his book now, and he said it took him 6 months. He was meditating 12 hours a day in the mountains. He did this thing in India, and then after that he could still the mind for like a half an hour. That was it. That's like he thought that was like a really great achievement. And the only reason I bring this up is because all of this this work that you're helping us to renounce samsara, unless it's accompanied by a type of mind training to help us be able to focus our minds on the path, so to speak. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I'll just try and say it. Unless it's accompanied by this a training of the mind towards where you want it to lead, this becomes a trap in and of itself. All of this, all of the samsara and all of the dissatisfaction in samsara. In other words, our mental craving and aversion can be triggered by everything that we see around us, unless we have mental training to lead us out of it. I just wanted to get your comments on that.
I'd just say, like in one sense, of course you're right. As we have to train our minds and we have to develop concentration. But what I would suggest, if you look at, which I think is quite meaningful, in other words, is if you look at the sequence of trainings in the Lamrim, right, in the stages of the Path to Enlightenment text, this one comes before developing calm abiding, mental quiescence, calm abiding. And there's a profound reason for that, which is that, so you don't have to develop calm abiding to develop renunciation, for sure. Like, in other words, you can develop renunciation before that.
Right.
And actually, in a sense, you have to, because what happens is, like, there are many stories like this, and I mean, actually, both in traditional Buddhism, but also in modern practitioners, like you come across, where this is true, where, in other words, let's say this right, if you contemplate these topics, where you don't need calm abiding, you just need to really, think sincerely and recognize your own experience and contemplate it, and, you have to have some focus, but it doesn't have to be like, you don't have to have a half hour of unwavering concentration, for example. First of all, it does bring about a change in our, like our relationship to objects, for example, our relationship to other people. We sort of, one thing is if you contemplate this enough, you start to calm down some of your craving and grasping and like some of those things do decrease as you contemplate this. But the other more important one, I guess, is this, is if a person hasn't contemplated this and they go off to develop, let's say develop deep concentration, then what happens is that the person, let's say they go do a retreat like Alan Wallace did, but if the person hasn't done this meditation, then what happens is that the person's is off, sort of sitting and trying to focus their mind, but then because they haven't developed their renunciation, what happens is that the person subtly starts thinking things like, wow, once I develop this really good concentration, people are going to think I'm really cool. Like
Or
maybe I'll
actually,
develop.
I'm doing it. I mean, like this.
Yeah,
That's
look,
what he talks about in the book.
yeah.
Like he says people confuse. They have a moment of steadiness in the mind, and they think they've achieved the emptiness.
Yeah.
But it's just all it is that you just held. He said so. There's this idea that it's what he called like an accomplishment mindset.
Yeah.
That there's something to be.
Yeah. And so that's what happens. So if you haven't done this, you develop all those kind of, so there's many versions of that. Either you think, wow, look how look how cool I've done it, or you look at like, wow, look what I'm doing, or you think like, what others will think, or you just think like, oh, I'm better than others, I've done this and they haven't, or you develop a thought of somebody else is better than me, or is there some kind of always like, so if you haven't done this, what happens is that the samsaric mindset co-opts the meditation itself, essentially. And then meditation itself becomes another version of samsaric pursuit, is like, am I better than somebody else? Am I worse than somebody else? Have I achieved my goal? And it becomes co-opted by that. Whereas if you develop this kind of mind, then your meditation becomes a path to liberation. Actually, otherwise it doesn't even become that.
Well, then can I
So
just
that's the
ask you, what you're really describing is that it just becomes another form of self-cherishing. That's what you're really describing. And so, is the way then to practice bodhicitta on a daily basis, or exchanging self with others, or Tonglen practice, or one of those things which then really keep reminding you, or does this precede even that?
This has to precede that even.
Even that.
I mean, and I guess what I'll say is, to just be clear on that though, is like in one sense, just for like everyday practice, of course we can go out and do Tonglen, that's great, and so on, and practice, we should think about bodhicitta. We did that, in the prayer, for example. So, on one level, of course you do bodhicitta, for example, even on your way to work or things like that. But then in terms of realization, and so I'm differentiating it, like in daily life, of course we have to think about bodhicitta and Tonglen. But then the point is in terms of actual realization, and the Buddhist teaching, and this is why the Lam Rim is so helpful, like in a way, and the Lamas are very clear in this way, is that, so in terms of, like, Khenchen Rinpoche gives I thought it was very useful, he differentiated, he said to just, to create bodhicitta motivation, he said, is easy, actually. In other words, you just have to feel, well, others suffer, I care about the suffering of all sentient beings, may I become enlightened to benefit all sentient beings, right? And you just develop that feeling, that's developing bodhicitta motivation. He said to realize bodhicitta is a completely different thing. In other words, there's two different things. One is to give rise to bodhicitta motivation, which is real, this is sincere, but that's not realizing bodhicitta. So in daily life we can give rise to bodhicitta motivation, we should all the time. But then in terms of realizing bodhicitta, you have to realize this first, because actually, I think it's Shantideva says that. He says something like, how can you develop the wish to liberate others from samsara if you haven't even yet had in a dream thought of liberating yourself from samsara? Something, I think Shantideva, I think that's a line, something like that. I can't remember the exact words, but there is that if you don't even understand your own aggregates as suffering, and if you don't understand, if you don't, he says that if you haven't in a dream had the feeling, may I become liberated, then when you say, okay, I'm going to realize bodhicitta, wishing to free all sentient beings from samsara, actually you don't really even know what samsara is, experience. It's like you haven't yet really, through contemplation and through experience, gotten a, or as you can say, you can say the words and maybe you memorize something, but you don't really have that feeling of what samsara is, and so then your compassion for others won't be deep.
Are you saying this, that a necessary ingredient towards realizing bodhicitta, not just the aspiration,
right,
but actually realizing is renunciation?
Yes,
is that,
for
is
sure.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes, 100% clear, yes, definitely. That's exactly it.
Are you saying then that renunciation is really the first step on the path?
No, it's actually not, because if you look at the Lam Rim, it's not the first. Remember, because this is why this module comes late in the, actually if you look at Discovering Buddhism.
Impermanence is before.
Yeah, so like Precious Human Rebirth is, actually if you look at the sequence in there, the very first one is devotion to the spiritual teacher, then Precious Human Rebirth, then Impermanence, and then, then there are others too. There's still before Samsara and Nirvana, there's like Impermanence and Death, and then there's Refuge and Karma also. Right? All those things come before. Because actually if you think about it in terms of the three scopes of practice, the first scope is just wishing for a better future rebirth. Right? This is actually the middle scope. So all the meditations of the low scope, which are essentially giving up on just, because this is giving up on samsara, we're focusing on now, but there are those first meditations that are low scope that are trying to give up just on attachment just to this life. And those actually all come before these contemplations.
Are you saying that, because this sequence thing is actually really important, because if we try to take on something before we've really understood or practiced some of the previous steps, we can actually lose our way, or worse still, go backwards. I mean, or have this problem where we think we're progressing and we're actually not progressing. But my question to you is, renunciation is, I mean, if you haven't contemplated those other things, impermanence, precious human birth, karma, are you saying that you really shouldn't spend any time on contemplating renunciation?
No, again, it's like, again, it's hard to differentiate this, but like, that there is a, that it's fine to contemplate. In other words, it never hurts to contemplate renunciation. It's a good thing to do, but but then again, you won't get the realization if you haven't done. That's the difference. Like, whereas if you want to familiarize your mind with it, that's good, right? In other words, it's helping. But at some point, you're gonna have to. If you really, really, really want to realize renunciation, then you have to also, like, in a way, go back and at least have some understanding of those earlier points.
So to realize renunciation, so this is a very important question. Does that mean that you, because we filled our minds today in the meditation sessions with a desire for renunciation. What does it mean when you say you've realized renunciation?
I think I've heard two different definitions of it, but Gabe, do you remember the line? Actually, do we have it? I think it's in. I wonder if it's in this book from Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Prayers 125. Yeah. I'll read you what Lama Tsongkhapa. The reason I wanted to read you what Lama Tsongkhapa says about that, and then I'll say two different definitions. Then we'll stop for lunch break. But there it is. So Lama Tsongkhapa, his verse is this: if having meditated thus, you do not generate admiration even for an instant for the prosperity of samsara, if an attitude seeking liberation arises day and night, then the intention definitely to leave psychic existence has been generated. So what he's getting at there is that when somebody's like what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying there, right, is that if somebody's realized renunciation, it means that, like, it doesn't mean that's the only thing they think about, right? Because they may think about, somebody asks them a question, well, where's the Walmart? They're going to think, well, okay, the Walmart's over here. It's not that that's the only thought that comes to their mind. But what he's saying is that, like, that the person's baseline experience is always there, right? This wish to be liberated. And the analogy that's sometimes given is like, like a person like take the example of a person who's on death row, right? Whereas they think about other things. They may think, well, what's the prison serving for lunch today? But always in the back of their mind, right? If there were any way I could get out of here, I'd be gone in a second. Like if the person were saying, oh, your favorite, your whatever, their meatloaf for lunch, and the person likes meatloaf, they might be saying, oh, good. But if the second later somebody said the door's open, they'd be out that door, right? So it's that kind of mind. In other words, so I think that's clear the way Lama Tsongkhapa says it, actually. So that's the person's baseline. So it's not that people don't have other thoughts, but it's that always that wish is sort of a baseline, sort of like he says, right? Or is it that there's no real, like the meatloaf versus the door open, that's the feeling of anything. In other words, that somebody could say you could have $1 million, you could have, you could be famous, you could be...
Diogo Kensei has a slightly different take on that. He says that the way to achieve that is to completely abandon your desire for any comforts in this life or for any success in this life.
Well, almost okay. He says, you do not generate admiration even for an instant for the prosperity of samsara. So he's saying the same thing. Yeah, that's the first half of that verse. Is he saying, like, you don't really? There is I guess that's the other part of the. It's like you don't really. I don't know what the word is. It doesn't have the same pull anymore. It was like that lady I was telling Gabe about earlier, right? Who, like, this Tibetan nun I was just hearing about yesterday, where her family members were telling me that, like, whenever they would say, oh, do you want to go, let's go do this, like trying to show her something fun, or, she's like, after I meditate, and they come back 3 hours later, okay, are you ready to do it now? I'm not done with my meditation yet. And then then it's like time to go to sleep. And then she wakes up the next day. They say, okay, what time do you want to go out? She's like, after I finish my meditation. And then again, okay, well, it's like, it's been all day. Why don't we go do some, samsaric normal activity? And she's like, oh, she's very polite. So I'm happy to do it, but I have to finish my meditation. Like, it's that kind of like that. When they told me, I thought, oh, she's realized renunciation. There's like, she shows the aspect. I mean, I think she both has realized that, and also she shows what that's like when somebody's realized. Where there's no, all those other things are just not of any particular. And like I was telling Gabe that story, right? And then they were saying somebody gives her like some money, right? And she immediately says, oh wow, great, some money. Let's sponsor. Let's give it to some monks to do prayers for all sentient beings. And then they say, what? But that's all the money you had. She said, I know, isn't that great? Like, I'm so happy. I gave it. She gives it away immediately, and then like she's broke again. So you can see like, oh gosh, it's clear. Like in other words, that's no. And I was saying that this is not somebody who was like a high toku or some kind of a great scholar or something. It's just somebody who went to Lamrim. I was saying to them, well, who'd she study with? She went to lectures of Dalai Lama, listened to the Lamrim teachings, and then meditated on them. Now she's like lived her, she's gotten that level of realization where clearly, she realized renunciation, and where it's like all she cares about is meditating on the path to enlightenment to benefit others, or whatever, like, but it's not, whatever, if you give her, whatever you would give her, she's happy to just give it away because it's nothing. So, I guess what I'm getting at is like, to me, that's an example of somebody where it's not, to me, I just like examples like that because it's not, what's the way to say it? It's not something that far off, right? Like she's an ordinary person too. She's not some like reincarnated some person. She was like an ordinary person who just listens to the teachings, but actually did what we're describing. She sat down and meditated over and over on it and kept thinking about it and related to experience. And then she's like realized these things. So anybody can do that.
You said there were two definitions.
Oh, so I just said, like with both renouncing this life and renouncing samsara, Lama Tsongkhapa is pretty clear, so I think we have to go with his ultimately, but some people say, like having zero interest in this life or having zero interest in samsara. Others say that your main interest is that. So they're different, like, so there are two different ways of looking at it. Like one is sort of saying, I guess some scholars, Ken Rinpoche pointed out, he said some scholars will say, having like no interest in samsara, having no interest at all in the pleasures of samsara, is that half of the sign. Others say that the person's genuine, like main interest is liberation, but they don't say zero or something. So it's just a difference.
What's your take on that?
I don't know which one's correct on this.
So how come
they
say like you have to have like anger, like aversion towards some like aversion, like hatred, kind of like towards samsara. How?
I guess, the Lama Tsongkhapa doesn't say anger, right? He says not having attraction. He says he defines it as two parts, right? One is not having attraction to samsaric things. That's clear, and the other one is an attitude seeking liberation that arises day and night.
Yeah.
Right. So day and night you want to get out. Yeah. So I guess there is a feeling of aversion, like a prison.
Yeah, because I had like
right.
he's only said that in Dharma Zopa.
Yeah.
Say that you have to have like some kind of aversion. So
the way Lama Zopa says, I think this is a good way to describe it. Like Lama Zopa says, it's a version like this. Like the way Lama Zopa has described it is that that you see samsaric things like sometimes Lama Zopa says it's like vomit. Mm-hmm. He says like somebody offers you some kind of samsaric pleasures. He says that, and he says the experience of the person who's realized renunciation is a little like if I came up to you with like a bowl of vomit and said, "Do you want this?" Like you would be like, there would be an aversion there of like, "Oh, get that away from me." It's like that kind of feeling.
Yeah.
Or sometimes you can see that also in Shanti, like in Shanti Deva when he talks about like the pleasures of sexuality. Mm-hmm. You can see it where like he's like he was a pure monk, and he's like and you almost get the sense of like the way I would look at vomit, right? He's like he's like my body's like my body's filled with poop and urine, and her body's filled with poop and urine, and vomit is actually in there. It's just not outside the body. you know, it is actually you're giving the person a bag of vomit. It's just it's hidden, you know, at that moment. You know, and he's kind of like, and he's like, what are you talking? You know, like you get the sense. I mean, Shanti Deva doesn't say it like that, but you get this feeling when you read Shanti Deva on that topic that it's like, you know, if like you get this feeling that if like the most beautiful, you know, the most beautiful person in the world came up to him and said, oh, that it would be like he'd be going like, you know, well, it'd be the same as if somebody came, you know, here's one bag of poop, one of urine, and one of vomit. Here, do you want it or something? And it's wrapped in skin. You know, that'd be he'd be like, oh, like, you know, it's that kind of aversion. So it's not angered like in the sense of
yeah, I got it.
yeah. But okay, maybe we should take a lunch break and then come back and then we'll meditate on the. Let's then we'll meditate more on renunciation. So let's do that. And I was thinking also in the afternoon, like today's a Tara day, so earlier I sort of thought we would do a whole Tara puja, but I think that's too much. I think it's better to keep meditating, so maybe we can just do like 21 praises to Tara, because that's very brief. At least we can do that, sort of dedicated to, because it's Sakadawa, which is a holy time, so it'd be good to at least do that. So we have it in the book, so maybe we'll meditate, then do that, and then meditate again. So it'll be like a break in between meditations or something. So we can just do it once or 3 times. That's short. So. Okay. The Guru, the Buddha, whatever, like who embodies all the refuges, all wisdom, compassion. And so, you know, thinking of that, then we'll take refuge. So I go for refuge until I'm enlightened. So the Buddha, the Dharma, the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Well, let's keep going. We'll just at least go through the 4 measurables and the 7 limbs. And we'll just read these once. So, may all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence, and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. So that's a really short version, right, of what we did earlier in a more elaborate way. So then imagine again that because of that, imagine that again like the Guru, Buddha, who embodies like all the wisdom, compassion, and skillful means of enlightenment, like is pleased and radiates down, like coming down from the enlightened being or your crown, are beams of light that are of 5 colors, white, red, blue, yellow, and green. And flowing along those is nectars made of light also. And so totally filling your body with light nectar. It fills your body from the bottoms from your toes and your fingers, your legs and your arms, torso, your head, so that your body becomes like a pristine, luminous light, 5 colors. And all the sicknesses, imprints of sickness, interferences, negative karmas, obstacles are cleansed and purified by that. You receive like your mind is kind of blessed by that also. To progress in the realizations of all the stages and paths from the very beginning all the way up to full enlightenment. And in particular, you receive like a blessing to realize the nature of samsara, the nature of the path to liberation from samsara, and like the mind of renunciation. And then, I think before we get to the 12 links, let's do one meditation just on the 6 types of suffering, just because I think it's a good transition between the sufferings of the human realm and then the 12 links, which are, kind of focus on more than just the human realms. So we'll do that contemplation, both because it's a good transition and also it's a good one for developing renunciation. So the first of these 6 types of the suffering of samsara, they're again just 6 contemplations. So the first, let's call the first one uncertainty, the suffering of uncertainty or unreliableness. And so first of all, like in terms of uncertainty, right? One can focus on, particularly on relationships, right, with others. And then as long as we're in samsara, if we check up, right, that there's, actually it's true, right, there's nothing certain. There's no permanent friends or relationships in samsara. So oftentimes, right, we want to think, actually, so actually you're thinking yourself, so you say, oftentimes I want to think that I have some kind of permanent, reliable refuge in the samsaric context, actually. So we're kind of challenging that thought by looking at reality. And actually, if we check up and analyze, then it's definitely true, right? That friends become strangers, or friends become enemies. Right? Enemies become friends. Actually, even the idea that there's some part of me that believes that that samsaric relationships can be truly reliable is kind of is unrealistic and kind of a childish notion. If we look in the world, right, like very, very dear friends, then later sometimes they actually, can hate each other. Sometimes even kill each other. And for sure, we're all old enough we can look at our own experience, right? So there are people who I once considered like a very dear friend, or like almost like a brother or a sister, and now like they're a stranger actually. They don't even, I don't know what they're doing, they don't know what I'm doing. Like the friendship just fell apart. And maybe people who like once, you can check, right, if you dated, where there was a time where you thought, oh, I can't live without this person, or like the most important person in the world to me. Now they're like a complete stranger. It's possible even if you saw them on the street, that you wouldn't recognize each other. That's even within this life, right? That's just within this one lifetime. And then the same thing, right? If we look in the world, even between countries, actually, right? Like, to think that there's anything permanent, it's just silly, right? Like one time, like England and America, right, were horrible enemies, right, at war with each other. And England became like now the closest ally. If you think that's permanent, that's just silly, right? Then another time, like Germany was the worst, right, enemy, or Japan too, right? Now Japan's an ally. So now sometimes somebody looks and says, oh, this, some other country's an enemy. But these things are by nature changeable. There's nothing reliable about friends or enemies. It seems so concrete though at the time, right? As if you were in America during the Revolutionary War, and like somebody just said the word England, immediately like the feeling and the image enemy would arise. Now, on a political level like that, somebody says England, you think friend, right? Ally, friend. But then if you think of like Afghanistan or Syria or North Korea, right? So somebody says North Korea, then a certain image comes to your mind, right? And you think, oh, that's North Korea. I have this idea. I know what North Korea is. That's the enemy, right? There's nothing permanent about that, right? You think of Japan, you say, oh, friend. There's nothing permanent. Or England, friend, So on every level, right? Whether it's individuals, right? Between nations, between groups. There's no reliable relationship within samsara. And in this contemplation, actually, we can see that just in this life, right? That many times I had friends who became enemies and dislike. There was dislike or became strangers again. There were strangers who, when I first met them, I thought, oh, this person's not interesting at all. Then later they were like a dear friend. There are people who you can really like find terribly annoying, and then later you can like care deeply for them. Actually, sometimes like you go back and forth, right? You think they're. Sometimes it goes like really fast, even. Oh, I can't live without this person. Oh, I'd like to murder this person. Oh, I can't live without them. Anyways, like that's just in this life. Then you look across. Then what Buddhism says is, if that's true in this life, then you could just take a moment to imagine what's it like across many lifetimes, right? As the Buddha said that, right? Like sometimes there were stories like that where like the Buddha or different arhats would see somebody and be like, for example, like somebody would be kicking a dog away from the food, and then the yogi would look and see, oh, that was his mother in his last. Like, the mother died, she came back as a dog, and now they're kicking away from the table. Right? And like then there was some story like that where this person was like totally adoring their daughter, like cherishing them so much, and then this yogi could see, oh, that was that person's worst enemy who had died, and they hated that person in the previous body, right? But then they died and came back as the daughter, then suddenly they loved them. Then later they'll hate them again. So the point there is that we check for ourselves then. We have to apply this to ourselves and say, so the people who I feel, oh, this person, I can't live without them, and they love me, and they're kind to me, right? If I'm relying on that, then I'm sort of not seeing reality. It's not to appreciate kindness, but if I think, oh, I can ultimately rely on that, that's just silly. So there's nothing reliable, there's nothing certain in samsara. And that mainly you think of in terms of relationships, but the same goes for wealth, right? Or resources, or health, or any of those things. Right? So like, same thing, right? You could get like a really nice place to live, with some hardship. But if you actually check, right, every day somebody's house burns down. People's houses burn down. All the time it happens, right? Natural disasters, and then somebody's whole place is gone. So if you have this feeling like, oh, my home, that's some kind of ultimate refuge or some kind of certain thing for me, then that's silly. The same with wealth, right? There are people like, first of all, like lots of people get scammed, and their wealth just disappears, or they invest poorly, right? But even if you don't invest poorly, even if you're very smart and careful, right? Then there's lots of countries where it happens, right? That the currency gets devalued, and it's worth nothing. And so with the economic changes in the U.S., who knows, right? You can't say, oh, for sure, if I save up X amount of money, I'll be fine later. Currency becomes devalued, then that money is just numbers on a piece of paper. So we think we can like take some kind of refuge or find like a safe harbor in samsaric. There's a part of us that always wants to do that, this contemplation you have to recognize, actually none of those things are certain. I can't really rely on any of those things. Right? Even the happiness of the God realms, right? And they die. Those gods, they die and fall back. So there's nothing, even if you say, I'll take refuge in a God realm, okay, you know, my money will get devalued, but not like God realm, divine pleasures. But actually it's the same deal. You can't rely on that. They say even in the God realm, right, you have all these like beautiful friends and consorts and whatever. Right? But then they say that when your body starts to change, when you're a god and it starts to show signs of you're going to die, that the other gods, because they're so attached to permanence, they get frightened of you and they run away. Right? So you could have like very dear friends in a god realm. Then when the time of your death comes, they all like run from you like you're frightening, and you die alone. So there's nothing certain. There's nothing, no certainty within samsara. Then the second of these 6 is that you're never satisfied. And so this is true actually, right? Like in other words, you know, sometimes like in Tibetan Buddhism, sometimes there's a practice of doing like a nundro, right, or a preliminary practice where you do 100,000 of something. And sometimes we think that's a lot. But actually, like in samsara, since beginningless time, like I've been reborn, right, we're thinking like this, I've been reborn since beginningless time in samsara. So actually, it's not just 100,000, I've done everything limitless times. And so I know, actually you can see in our own life, but also if you expand it out to many lifetimes, actually there's no amount of chocolate, right? Whereas if you eat 1,000,000 pieces of chocolate, right, over the years, it's not that then you think, okay, I've achieved the ultimate satisfaction of chocolate, right? If you eat a whole box of chocolate today, then, you know, it's not like, oh, then I'm done with chocolate for all time. Right? You know, or if you go to some beautiful musical event, right? It's not like, oh, then you're completely satisfied and permanently happy, right? You always want more. So this never satisfied, right? There are 2 ways of viewing it. One is that whatever you get, you always want more. Right? Like so, if you get affection, right, then it's not that you're ultimately satisfied. You want more affection. If you get wealth, then you want more wealth. If you get popularity, then you want everybody to like you. Right? You start to get a little bit famous, and you have attachment to that, then you want more and more of that. Right? With food, with right, if you buy a song that you really like, you know, you download it or something, you listen over and over, right? You think, oh, this is great, right? But then after a couple weeks, you get tired of that and you want a new song. Then another way of viewing this never satisfied is over the course of lifetimes. Right? Or actually, this is good to contemplate in terms of renunciation, is they say like, you know, like you've been like a king or a queen, not just once, not just 100 times, not just 100,000 times, but an infinite number of times. You never gained any satisfaction. You've been like a rock star an infinite number of times. You've been a goddess an infinite number of times. And it's just like the same, like so there's this quality in samsara of you just keep doing the same things over and over and over. And there's never an end to that process of, Lama Tsongkhapa said, you know, we follow craving, hoping for satisfaction, but we just end up wanting more. We just end up with more craving. So that process, until you realize the path to enlightenment, it's just an endless cycle. And that the point here is to realize I never will be satisfied by following that path. Every kind of pleasure that there is, I've been down that road, not just once, not just 10 times, not just 100 times. And again, we can see this, like even you look, right, the richest people in the world, they're not totally content, actually. Many of them are terribly unhappy. The people with the most beautiful partners, right, actually they're not. Oftentimes they're, you read stories about their divorces. Right? So people think, oh, if only I could have somebody like that. Right? They're rich, or they're powerful, they're beautiful. But then actually if you look at the life story of those people, then they're dissatisfied, often they're having actually more complicated problems than my problems. So there's nothing in samsara that will satisfy. And the next of these 6 is dying over and over. That's the idea here is you think, oh my goodness, wow, I've been like, I'm a little freaked out at the idea I'm going to die at the end of this life. But the idea that I've just been dying, I die and I get reborn, and I die, and every time I die, it's like terrifying. It's like an utter horrible tragedy, right? And then I'm reborn, and then I die again, and again, and again. And actually, the number of times I've died, like, if you took all my corpses, they would, like, and you try, in other words, like this galaxy, not just, like, first of all, this solar system, it would be too small, right? Whereas there's a huge amount of space in the solar system, right? It would be way too small. Actually, this whole galaxy would be too small just from all my corpses, because they're infinite. Right? It's actually 1,000 galaxies, still it would be too small for all my corpses to fit in. Because I've died so many endless times. And every time I die, I'm terrified. I think it's like a tragedy, right? It's like the end of the world for me. But then I die again, and again, and again. And that's part of the nature of this samsara that I'm creating through the 12 links that we're going to get to, of dependent arising. You start to feel, wow, how like boring that is, and also how pointless that is. And how horrifying, right? Because death is not a pleasant process. So you start to think, wow, I've got to stop this cycle of dying over and over and over. And the goal is you're contemplating these things, right? Like the never being satisfied, the dying over and over, the uncertainty. It's as if you start to feel a little bit of some kind of emotion, whether it's like disgust or horror or fear or almost like a sense of existential nausea, whatever feeling arises like that, that's a good sign. In other words, the idea is to get it's supposed to become kind of visceral. Like if you think of that many corpses of you, and that much horror of dying, it's supposed to be it's supposed to be disturbing. And then the next suffering is not only do I die endlessly, right, beginninglessly, which means infinite, right? Actually, we can't even conceive infinite, right? Infinite is inconceivable, but I've died an infinite number of times. Actually, the mind can't really wrap itself around dying an infinite number of times. Because in infinity, like 10 million doesn't make any dent, right? So I've died 10 million times, but that doesn't make a dent in the infinite number of times I've died. Because infinity is infinitely larger than 10 million. Right? And there are an infinite number of 10 millions in infinity. It's like the idea that I've died that many times is like, on the one hand it's inconceivable, and the other it's sort of And actually, let's say with death, just one more minute, because also, so sometimes I died old, but sometimes I died young. Sometimes I died, so I was, and every way people die, I've died, infinite number of times. I was murdered, I died of old age, I died in childhood, I died of every kind of illness. And if I don't become liberated, I'll continue dying, right? So even if I don't get, I don't get cancer in this life and I die of a heart attack, then in some future life I'll get cancer. Right? In some other life I'll get some other, every disease that there is, right? Every kind of poisoning, every kind of horror, every kind of war, every kind, I'll die in all those things. I have died in all those things, and I will die in all those things again and again until I become liberated. I'll die of poverty, I'll die of starvation, I'll die of bombings, in utter terror. I'll die while killing others, over and over and over. Until you develop, by recognizing that, right, you develop a sense of it could only be something like horror or disgust, or that is unbearable to just spend to spend all of eternity just harming others and dying senselessly. Suffering yourself, causing suffering to others, and dying senselessly for all eternity is not a reasonable solution. So then not only do you die endlessly, right, but the next of these six is over and over again also, endlessly, just as many times as I died, I was thrown without control into all kinds of rebirths. Right? And if you're in samsara, you don't have a choice. Right? The nature of samsara is not that you choose where you were born. So over and over again, sometimes without any choice, I'm reborn in a hot hells. Sometimes in the cold hells. Sometimes a whole lifetime boiling in some hot pit. Sometimes a whole lifetime just frozen in ice. Sometimes a whole lifetime just being beaten and tortured. Sometimes whole lifetimes in just horrific environments of being cut and crushed. Without any choice, then these things just happen endlessly in samsara. And then sometimes thrown into a life, suddenly I've been in the womb of a hungry ghost, then we're born like that. And then for tens of thousands of years I'm just in this horrific body, dragging myself around, starving, thirsty, feeling hopeless but unable to die. Then, sometimes thrown into the body of an animal, over and over, endlessly. Right, so all those corpses that we were talking about before, right, that wouldn't fit in the billion galaxies, for example, right? They're not all human, right? Many of them would be corpses of hungry ghosts, corpses of hell beings, corpses of animals, right? The number of times I've been reborn is a spider, is infinite. Of a fly, infinite. Of a cockroach, infinite. And then when I'm thrown into human births, right, it's not always I don't have any choice, right, so it's not always, this life has been, as we just meditated on earlier, is filled with suffering. But oftentimes found myself, I'm suddenly out of the intermediate state between death and rebirth, and I'm in the womb of some person, right, who's in a situation of war, or in utter poverty. Right? Suddenly I'm we're born in we're born a little boy and given, then as a child given a gun, shooting people. We were born as a little girl who's in some country, in and sold into like slavery, like they do, trafficking. Right? That's not somebody. Right now, I say, oh, that's somebody else. That's not me. Actually, tomorrow if I die today, tomorrow that could be me. Right? I could be reborn in that place. Right? Like we feel, when we hear, what was it, like 80,000 people were killed in Syria, and they're, again, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of refugees, right? With no place to eat, no place to get medical care, right? We may feel, oh, I'm here, they're there, right? But if I die today, then tomorrow suddenly I could be in the womb of one of those refugees, where the mother has not enough to eat, so I'm in the womb, but I'm not getting proper nourishment, my brain doesn't form well, and so on. My body doesn't form in a healthy way, then I'm reborn. If I die today, right, then tomorrow I can be reborn in one of those countries, right, where then I'm a female fetus and they don't like that, then I get sold to some kind of horrible situation, right, and don't ever feel loved, in the family, and then born someplace there's like no education at all. And again, you shouldn't think that's far off, right? That could be me. Like, I could be that fetus tomorrow. And we're born in some place where there's no opportunity to get education. No opportunity to do any kind of, learn anything, right? Just to do some kind of hard labor. From the moment I'm capable of doing it up until I die. We're born into a family where parents have some kind of rage, anger problem, some kind of mental illness. Then without any choice, you're trapped there, right? Once you're born, once you become like a fetus there, right? And then you're reborn, you don't have any choice, right? You won't remember this life, you don't have any kind of freedom. And then I'm just trapped in that body, in that family, in that context for an entire lifetime. I can't get a redo or something. I'm just stuck there. And it's not as we think about it for myself, right, you think, and it's not that may happen actually, right? If I don't get liberated, those things will happen. Only one of those will be my next life, but eventually all those things will happen. And I'll just keep getting reborn, thrown around into one birth and another birth. You may say, oh, I'd like to be this or that in my next life. Right? May say, oh, I'm Buddhist, so I'm praying, may I be some kind of yogi or monk or nun or wealthy person or something, whatever. But actually, your own actions determine, right, what happens. We've done lots of negative actions, so for sure, right? No matter what we say we want, just wanting it doesn't make it reality. So even though I want that, then there's negative actions that manifest, and instead you get reborn as some kind of a horrible situation. And that will happen. And again, we're contemplating. I've been died infinite times. I've been reborn infinite times. I'll continue to die, and I'll continue to be thrown into all these different unbearable rebirths if I don't achieve liberation. Then the fifth of these six kinds of suffering is that whatever I gather together or climb up to, I'll always lose or fall down from. So that's in this life we can see that, right? In other words, if I fight my way to get some kind of like status, well, actually, you know, the higher up I climb, the easier it is to fall. You know, the farther it is to fall down. And actually, we can see that. First of all, just on a worldly level, we can see that if we look around, right? Like, it's similar to the point, the first point about nothing's reliable, but this one is like kind of you lose everything. Right? So you can see, like, for example, actually, it always happens, right? You look at like General Petraeus recently, right? He spent like so many years trying to gain some kind of status in the world, right? With great hardships and great effort. Like he earned his way up through a system to become like one of the most respected people. Now somebody was just saying last week, right, that like he has to choose carefully even just where he goes to a restaurant because people will make him feel embarrassed or humiliated. But that happens actually whether it's like Hollywood stars or, you know, it's like people who rise up or in the government or in any system, right? Oftentimes that happens. And from a Buddhist perspective, then we expand that outward and say, actually, like, even if I climb up, right, like, climb up in a future life to be like a president or a king, right? Actually, what happens usually, right, is that when you're in a high position like that, then you create more negative karma, right? And then you fall down again. It becomes even worse. Right? Because first of all, there's like the arrogance of power. Then also there are like demands, right? Where you have to, like somebody does something, then you're supposed to like retaliate. So you create all kinds of bad karma from arrogance, from pride, from aggression. And also it's easy to desire more because you have resources. And so actually you get a high status and you develop more afflictive emotions, and then you fall down lower again. And they often say that with like the God realms, right? Somebody creates a merit, they get reborn in a God realm, but then they use up, or by experiencing the pleasures of that realm, they use up their good karma, and then they fall down. So whatever you gather together, you'll lose it. Whatever status you gain, it's not permanent. For this contemplation, I also often think of, for me it makes it more visceral. I often think of when I was spending time in a hospice. I think it was when my father was dying, actually. Where like, so there are all these people laying in beds, right, emaciated, you know, getting ready to die. You know, and then if they can still speak, they tell the nurse, right? So somebody says, oh, I was a CEO. Or, oh, I was a doctor. And the nurse politely smiles. Like, oh, that's wonderful. Now let's clean your butt. You know, it becomes totally irrelevant. All the things that like one thinks of oneself as being like quite, what's the word, of significance or some kind of like, wow, I did this or I did that. Right, like if you're, like when you're laying in the hospice bed, right? If you were rich or you were poor, actually really makes no difference. If you were popular or you were not popular, it doesn't make any difference. If you were famous or nobody cared about your name, actually doesn't matter. So like it's just, what's the word, like vanity, some kind of silly, you know, it almost has the significance of a dream. You know, if you wake up in the morning and you said to your like friend or somebody's there and you say, oh, last night I dreamt I was president. You know, it's like, oh well, so what? You were president in a dream for 5 years. That's what this life is like, though. You know, so you get some promotion and it seems important at the moment, right? Or you get a raise and it seems important at the moment. But actually later when you look back, it was like a dream. if you rise up at some job, then it seems important at that time. Even after you're retired, right? Nobody actually cares. It's just like a boring story. So all these things that we often care about, wealth or status or position, popularity, what people think of us. Actually, you could say, oh, these people really thought well of me. But there will come a time where all those people will be dead. So you're telling somebody, oh, a lot of people who are dead once thought I was great. That is like an empty echo. So you're just seeing so much of what I think is important is not terribly important. And the last of these 6 sufferings, this list of 6, is that in samsara, as long as you're in samsara, you're alone. And you go on alone. So it's quite clear, right? First of all, of course, like when you die, even if somebody's sitting there, actually you die alone. Even if somebody, whether there's nobody sitting beside your bed or there's somebody sitting beside your bed. Like when your sense power is shut down, actually even if there's somebody there, you don't know they're there anymore. You can't perceive. And you face, right, death itself by yourself. And you face the bardo, the intermediate state between birth and death alone. And because from our first contemplation there are no permanent friends, no permanent supports, so should we think like this, like, so I am alone in facing my suffering. When I'm stuck in a craving, it's me stuck in a craving. Right? I'm stuck alone with that. When I'm grieving, ultimately, it's a private inner experience, right? Even if I reach out to somebody for support, ultimately, I'm stuck in my own subjectivity. When I die, I'll face the Lord of Death alone. When I wander through the dangerous and frightening path between lives, I face that path completely alone. I can't take anything or anyone with me. No matter how much people cared about me, the winds of my karma blow me where they will. And even my most cherished relatives disappear like the way a dream disappears in the morning. And when I'm thrown into my next rebirth, none of my old companions can come with me. I'm thrown there alone to start over again. And throughout beginningless time, right, I've wandered alone through every imaginable kind of suffering. I suffered all those different sufferings of hells, of hungry ghosts, of animals, alone. Whenever I had some companion, then it fell apart. Because in samsara, right, whatever arises due to causes and conditions changes moment to moment and eventually ceases. So one actually can feel right now, right? Ultimately, there is no ultimate friend, there is no ultimate protection within the samsaric context. And so then let's think, right? So if I've suffered alone through all these different kinds of uncertainties, losses, births and death, then now is the time for me to take responsibility to liberate myself from samsara. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, the Buddha said that, right? He can teach me the path, but actually, I have to practice it if I want to achieve liberation. So we develop now this feeling of renunciation. This feeling of, I take responsibility to liberate myself. I'm not going to neglect my own practice of the path to enlightenment. Instead, I'd rather neglect those samsaric things than neglect liberation. I finally have this precious human rebirth with every freedom, every opportunity. So I'm not going to waste it on things that are like fights and dreams. Things that have no essence, that only lead me right to further dissatisfaction and craving. Instead, I'll emerge from that, like a lotus rises up out of the mud. So let's just silently think for a few minutes about these themes, right? So nothing's certain. I'll never, ever be satisfied by following ignorance and craving, grasping, and aversion. As long as I follow those, I die endlessly, I'm reborn endlessly. Everything I gather up falls apart. Everything I gain, I lose. I go on alone always, until you feel like I'm sick of that process. And I will practice the 3 higher trainings in order to gain liberation from samsaric suffering. continue just for a few more minutes to meditate on this. Just want to remind you, so like, if your mind gets distracted away from the topic, right, then bring it back. And then you contemplate, right, the nature of samsara. But if you develop that feeling, just a little bit, let's say, the feeling of renunciation, then you can actually stop contemplating and just let your mind kind of dwell in that feeling of renouncing samsara, of aspiring for something better, for liberation. So at those times you can actually just stop contemplating and just sort of let your mind dwell or rest or abide, let's say, in that feeling of renunciation. You know, if you lose the feeling, even if it's just a little bit, if you lose it, you know, then you contemplate again. And you don't have to contemplate all 6 points, right? If you just, you know, you may just think, oh my gosh, you never get satisfied with this, you know, and just think of that one point till you develop the feeling. And then you just dwell on the feeling of renunciation, renouncing a samsara where you're never satisfied. Or renouncing having these kind of aggregates that one can never be satisfied in. Then you just dwell on that. You know, or if you lose the feeling, right, then you can just think about, you know, being reborn and dying over and over, or being so alone in that process. And if again you feel that's unbearable, I've got to become liberated, you know, then that's enough. Then you just dwell in that feeling of aspiring genuinely towards some kind of liberation from samsara. The trick is to contemplate enough to give rise to at least somewhat of a feeling. But then, once you have a bit of that feeling, then to dwell on that and just let it increase and familiarize your mind with it. And let yourself sort of become habituated to or familiar with that kind of mind. So really only contemplate when you lose that feeling of renunciation, or that state of renunciation. But once you're in that state, even if it's not very strong at first, just sort of feel it, you know, almost like savor that feeling, or dwell in that feeling, or let that feeling sort of pervade your mind. Even if you just have the thought, yeah, how wonderful it would be, I would really like to be liberated. And a little bit of a feeling's there like that. And that, you know, from having contemplated, then just dwell in that for a while. come into a more interactive mode again for a little while. So again, just any questions or comments?
So is it like a building up, like you build up, and then you develop like a feeling. Then the more you build up, and then the more the stronger the feeling.
Then the more the sooner?
No, the stronger the
Yeah,
feeling.
yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I think like you have to have a balance of like, you know, there was a, that's why I want to do more of what we're doing at the end there, where you have to have a balance of like, you know, because if you wait until the feeling is, if you're trying to develop a very powerful feeling of renunciation at the beginning,
Yeah.
well then you'll just keep thinking, but you'll never do the, so I think it's okay at the beginning to just dwell in it, even if it's a little bit of this feeling of, oh yeah, I want to be free.
Yeah.
Because the more you familiarize your mind, then it'll naturally get stronger anyway.
Okay.
You know, if you then you go back to contemplating, you know, then you do that again, then you go back to contemplating, you know, then it'll slowly get stronger.
Okay.
Because it's hard also, because you know, you have to think a lot
Yeah.
to contemplate at the beginning, but you don't want to also spend the whole time just sort of, you know, like, it becomes too analytical, and
Yeah.
you have to also develop the feeling of like that too. And I think if you dwell in the feeling, even if it's like mild, then the next time it'll be a little bit easier and a little bit, because I think of like that word gom, right, meditation in Tibetan.
Yeah.
It means familiarization, right?
Uh-huh.
So that's really the idea, is like if you just dwell in that, your mind is getting more and more familiar,
Yeah.
and then it becomes easier the next time. I'll say one other thing too, like at the beginning, you know, we go through all 6 and all 10 and all, but once you're familiar with it, then like, there's no rule you have to do all the contemplate. You know, if you start contemplating, you develop that feeling from the first one, well then it's okay to just stop and just meditate on that feeling, you know, and then like the next day you can go on to the next one or whatever, but you don't have to always, I mean, we're reviewing a lot of them today, but you don't have to do the whole list of 6, you know. Whereas if you just think of uncertainty, right, and then you develop this feeling of like, oh my God, like what the hell, you know, am I doing, or so, you know, like it can come like a feeling like that. Well, then just stop and just meditate like that, like wow, like look at that, like life is really like that, you know, and then just stop, you know, just dwell in it, because you know, there's no rule you have to go through all of them every day or something. You know, it's not. Sometimes it's not too effective because it becomes too intellectual or something.
I have a question. How do you, like in everyday life, like I'm about to move and I have a set of friends there that the only thing they're interested in is going out to a bar, bikes, riding motorcycles, all this stuff. I'm really just not interested. And they're my friends and I don't want to be rude, but how do you like interact, like hang out for an hour, but like what do you do in that situation? You know, it's...
You mean because like you're afraid it'll hurt their feelings?
Yeah, I don't want to go out to a bar. I don't want to go see a band. I don't care about going to some motorcycle show. Without being rude, I mean, they know about my religion and everything. But I've changed since they've seen me in about 4 years. What do you do? You kind of have a clue from Facebook, to be honest, but it's like, what do you do?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little tricky, right? Because you don't want to hurt people's feelings,
And
but
they talk, you know. They want to, hey, when you hang out, they're talking.
yeah, I think in the long run, right, you have to just, like, what's the word? Well, actually, I'll say it this way. Maybe it's like in Buddhism they talk about. I think you have to differentiate 2 different things. One is, you know, of course, there's one thing of having compassion for people and trying to help them. That's one thing. But the other is like, let's say this right, like. Actually, there's a teaching in Buddhism. There's one analogy that some lamas give that I think it applies to this, where they say, actually there are 2. I'll share you. I'll just go into it a little bit because they talk about this thing of. They say if you take like a really, actually, let's say a kata, right? Those clean white scarves that you offer to like Kens Rinpoche sometimes, everybody. And they say, you know, so one of those is very clean and white, right? And then they say if you hang that like we do here sometimes near incense, right? Like this one by Maitreya that's right under the. You know, after a while, right, because this one that's sitting on Maitreya, after a while, if you pick that scarf up, it's going to smell like incense, right? But they say if you hang one in a latrine for a long time, and then then after a while, you pick up that one, it's going to not smell so good. And what they say is that we're the same. Like we are. There's us as like unenlightened, not very advanced people. Like we're the same, and that if we're not careful, like. How we spend our time and who we spend our time with, then we'll get worse. Actually, you know what I mean? Like, and you know, so like it's the same thing. Like if we choose to spend time around like really grounded, spiritual people, you know, like because we're very susceptible in a way still, then it influences us and we get better in our practice, right? Whereas if we spend a lot of time around people who are very caught up in negative stuff, we're not that advanced, and then we get worse, you know, and then it's like, and then we don't help them, we don't help ourselves, and then our life ends, and we didn't progress at all. So it becomes like where you have to kind of, almost like, again, it's not like to reject them or to stop being friends, like say, I don't care about you anymore, it's not that. But there is a natural process that one does if one's really serious about it, of like kind of, well, like that nun I was telling you, right, where it's like, oh, you know, come do this. Oh no, I'm too busy, I can't. You know, like, or she's like, no, I can't do that, I'm too busy meditating. You know, she doesn't necessarily, you know, we might not say meditating, because person might think that's whatever, but like where you say, oh, I'm too busy, I can't go. Oh, I can't do this, oh, I can't do that. You know, because you're sort of making wise choices for yourself. And, you know, people may not like it, but, you know, it's not rude to them, but just, so a lot of times you have to say no to stuff that's like negative. Yeah, and the people will just, it's just hard, like sometimes you don't want to hurt the person's feelings, but in the end, I'll say this too, actually, I'll share a story that one time somebody asked like Rinpoche a question like that. He said like, somebody said to Rinpoche something like, I was there, what they say? They said something like, oh, well people will think it's like weird and they'll be upset or something. And, you know, if I say no like that, and then Rinpoche said something like, he said something like, well, if you're practicing Dharma, then, he said like, he was saying like, if you're practicing Dharma sincerely, then normal people will look at you and think you're weird and bad. And then he said, but then again, you know, from the point of view of practicing Dharma, if you look at them, their choices are kind of weird. He didn't say bad, but he just said, look kind of weird. And then he said, so it's okay, we both think we're weird, or something like that. And he said, but then, like, let them think you're weird and go on and do it, you know, because otherwise you're, you know, so he was like, you have to just tolerate the sort of negative feedback, was I think what he was getting at, you know. Because it is, like, there's no way, I think also part of what he was saying was that you can't, it doesn't help to try to explain it to the person, really, because it doesn't make sense from there. In other words, what he was getting at there is like, well, if they're, I mean, our job is not to convince them to be somebody other than they are. They have the right to do what they want. Like, you respect everybody's freedom. But like, you know, if somebody asks you and you want to help them, that's different. But like, it's not to try to convince somebody that you're right or something, but just to let them think you're weird or let them be annoyed with you and have to tolerate that, you know, without putting them down, while still being nice to them, I think. So I think there's no way around like the sort of a little bit of discomfort in the process. Because it's not totally comfortable. You know, it seems like each step of the way that can happen, because like, you know, because like from a normal point of view it is odd, right? Like, well, why wouldn't you want to go get drunk? Or why wouldn't you want to go to this or that? But it's just a choice, right? Like in other words, life's short and you have to pick. You know. But I think that is important. Like sometimes it doesn't help too much to try to explain why or like give reasons, because it just makes people more, maybe like, oh, and also it's going to make them make more bad karma or something. You know, like then they can be like trying to convince you, you know, versus if you just say, oh, I'm too busy, and then they just think, oh, that's stupid. Whereas if you say, oh, I want to become enlightened, for example, and they say, well, enlightenment's stupid, come on, let's go. You know, then they're making bad karma, so it actually hurts them to tell them the whole story. It's better to not say too much, but ironically. You know? Yeah, any other comments? Or?
I think I've got a better understanding of renunciation through that guided meditation. I got a taste of it this time. And what I've been really struggling with is not being able to appreciate, like, the tankas and just the beauty of nature and things. It's like, how can you renounce that? But I say, you know, this time it's like, you can still appreciate it. Right. It's just a glancing, you know, non-attachment. I mean, study, I'm a slow learner. Right?
No, that's right.
Yeah, it was, because I've really been struggling. How can you renounce, you know, the beauty? Yeah.
Yeah, because if you look at these contemplations, there's nothing in there is saying don't appreciate.
Exactly. It's
beauty.
Just
it's the
permanent.
Attachment and the grasping
yeah.
and the thinking it's going to be permanent and the thinking it's going to give you some permanent. It's all that. That's
right.
the problem. Yeah, that's great insight. Because that's helpful. Otherwise, it gets confusing. That sometimes people have that wrong idea, or we all. I mean, any of us can. I think at moments feel like, oh no, where's the line between those? But once you contemplate, then it's fairly clear, right?
The loneliness one. Loneliness is kind of like, yeah, kind of like, when you talk about the bodies, kind of about that, like, yeah.
It helps to think about it in those ways, and we don't. And again, and like what kind of what she's getting, like in our culture, nobody's ever thinking this way. But in Buddhism, you know, well, but even in Tibetan, you know, nobody thinks that way unless you're meditating and practicing Dharma, right? It's like, it's a very, you know, it's like a unique.
So I was thinking about this. It's kind of weird. You talk about loneliness, and then I was thinking about like there's like the body pass through the walls, you know, the body like in intermediate state. Can we pass through the like?
Yeah.
Like you go different places.
Yeah. Yeah, they say a bardo being, right? The intermediate, what they say is that actually I heard this teaching that a bardo being, because they're not made of physical flesh, right? They're made of subtle, that they can go through anything, except I think the only thing they can't enter is a womb, because that has to take karma, that requires karmic connection.
Yeah.
But they can go any place, so they go through mountains.
So like if you're like I'm sitting here, they can just come pass through me.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, like in the movies, they sometimes show that, but it's really
I was
true.
thinking about that. I was like, you talk about the wind push, like the
Yeah.
wind. I was like, so right now saying now. So,
Yeah, and it probably is.
yeah.
Sometimes Lama Zopa told stories where people could see, like he would describe how the teaching, like, you know, you could see a certain number of people, but then people who could see that they would see like beings crawling over stuff, and like crawling on each other, like they could see a hungry ghost and bardo beings and all kinds of like. Lama Zopa sometimes has described that where it's like, oh my god, it's like freaky.
And then you're like, how do they pass? Like, how can you just pass through a wall? I mean, I can't do that.
But their body's not made of. I guess if you think about a wall, right? Like a wall appears solid to us, right? But actually, a wall's not solid, right, from its own side, right? Because it's mostly, actually, even scientists say, right, it's mostly empty space between the nuclei and the, you know, electrons and all that. You know, so from our point of view, our body can't, because our body's gross body and it's similar matter to that. So like relative to us, but if their body's made of a different kind of substance, then it relates to matter differently.
So like right now, like can my mind come out of my body?
Can your mind come out of your body?
Yeah.
Not when you're awake. They sometimes they say certain kind of dreams, like your dream body can be. They say not all the time dreams, but they say sometimes special dream, like a certain kind of dream. People have that, right? Where you have somebody like, I've met people like that. Normal people, I mean, who have like a dream where they saw something real that happened. So it's possible to happen in
the
a
mind
dream.
goes away, the body stays there.
Yeah. That can happen.
Wow. Amazing. And then you come back to
Come
this
back,
body.
yeah. Whereas in death, you can't go back. That's different.
It's very weird.
Yeah. So there's whole teachings also on the nature of the bardo.
Yeah.
And those are also like, I mean, it's good for this topic of renunciation, so I'll just mention like where they describe, Tibetan Lamas describe what that's like. And they say like, you know, it's like, what's the word? In a way it's like a dream, but it's different. At least in the dream there's something stabilizing because of your body. Like you still have the karma with your old body. But they say in the bardo, like there's no connection anymore. So they really describe, they say like these winds, like it's almost like winds of karma blow, and you're just like thrown like, where like you have a thought also, like because your body, they say the body of a bardo being, you know, like our body, we have to travel, we have to take a train or a bus, but they say with a bardo being, like if they get scared of something and they think, oh, I want to be away, like they can't really control it. So like suddenly they can be in outer space or something, and then they're like, where am I? And then like suddenly they can be in some other place, and it's like frightening. And also they say that like sounds and things can be like exaggerated because it's it doesn't have ordinary senses. So sometimes like if a certain thing happens, it can sound like a train hitting them, or like a, you know, they feel like they're falling off something, but they don't have a body to get hurt really. It's not the same. So like it was very like frightening and disorienting.
So can you use that body to do some kind of create like some like study? Can you use that body to study like?
You mean in the bardo, or you mean in the dream?
No, that kind of body like.
Yeah, like there are people who I mean, ordinary people can't do that, but like in there are these like what's the word? In tantric Buddhism, they teach some like, I guess like practices, right, where the person can learn to stabilize that body.
Yeah.
And once they learn to do that, like in their dreams, then they can do like there's like dream yoga practice. Then they learn to do things like what you're describing, where they can actually do it on purpose.
Yeah.
So there's a whole practice in Tibetan Buddhism of learning to do that. That's where they teach like methods of how to do it, and then then people use their dreams like to practice dharma or to study or to do things. Yeah.
That's amazing. So we have like a kind of different bodies like we can use.
Yeah. Yeah, that's part of what Tantra teaches, really, a lot of details about those things. Yeah, it is amazing, isn't it?
So I mean, so can you go like, let's say like, can you use that body to go to somebody else's body, see their mind, what they think about?
What they say is an ordinary person, like, I guess like a high practitioner could, but for an ordinary person, you could, actually they could go and see what the person's doing in their body, but it'd be hard, it's a different thing to see their mind.
Body,
You have to have, I think, clairvoyance to
Yeah.
read their mind. Once you have, once you have calm abiding, then you can do that.
So you can distract somebody, you can use, distract somebody, like, you can bother somebody, like.
Oh, I see, it actually bother them? I'm trying to think. I don't, it must be possible, I'm not sure though.
Interesting. That's kind of scary.
Yeah, there's all kinds of things that can happen, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, the whole the Bardo teachings are interesting. But yeah, any other comments? Maybe we should do the 21 praises to Tara now and then take a short break or something?
Hey, Lauren, I got a question real quick.
Yeah.
So when we're doing the meditations and the renunciation and all, what we just did, are we trying to get to the conclude, I guess the conclusion in our mind is, I need to be, I need to renunciate samsara, or the conclusion is, I must practice, or I have to practice dharma in order to renounce, or what is the conclusion?
Yeah, the conclusion really is like, well, it's like what Lama Tsongkhapa says in the Three Principles. So the conclusion is like, is that you would get to a conclusion where you would feel, I have to stop, like I understand now from my own experience, right? I have to stop chasing after or craving after samsaric happiness, and instead I have to seek liberation. You know, so it's that kind of conclusion. And then you think, so how do I do that? I'll practice 3 higher trainings, you know, in order to achieve. Right, so it's like this decision, I've got to stop craving and chasing after what actually causes suffering, which is samsaric things, right? And so I've got to, and so you make this decision, I've got to stop that, I've got to achieve enlightenment, and therefore I'm going to practice 3 higher trainings. So it's that kind of mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Because at first I was kind of doing that, you know, like I have to get out of this prison, I have to get out of this, you know. But then it was sort of like turning into, well, how do I do that? Well, how do I get out of it?
Yeah.
So it's starting to
though.
turn into that question. And then it's like, then it was like, oh, it was at the end, it was just like, I have to practice, I have to practice.
Yeah, that's right.
Then I
yeah.
thought I was getting ahead or something.
No, that's still right. That's still renunciation. Yeah, I was just thinking of an analogy. To me, it's similar. Like the developing renunciation, I sometimes think this, that like it's similar to what, like if somebody's let's say an alcoholic, right? Then there comes a point, right, where first the person thinks, like, you know, actually if you like study, like I know people who do AA, like, you know, like right. So the person reaches a point where then they think, this is unbearable. Like they hit bottom, right, and they think, I can't do this anymore. It's like, it's unbearable, you know. So that's like the beginning, right? But then the person says, I've got to go to, like, you know, it's almost like the first step is to realize this is unbearable, like the prison, just like what you said, right? They feel like this is like a prison, it's unbearable. But then the person has to go, man, like I need AA or, you know, something like that, or I need rehab, or I need, let's say they go, okay, I'm going to go to AA now. You know, so then they make a decision, right? And then they're going to go every day or something, or, you know, every week, you know, because they know they can't, in other words, you're not going to stop unless you do the right thing. But it's the same with samsara, and I'm just giving an analogy, it's not the same, but I mean, like, right, so the first step is you have to feel like, oh, this is like horrific. And then you feel, but, you know, that's not enough, because you also have to sense there's something, if you don't believe there's something better, then what's, you know, like, I mean, we believe it, but I mean, if you don't think, how do you get to something better? So then you have to think, oh, so yeah, I want to practice the 3 higher trainings in order to become liberated from this. That can liberate me from this, because the cause, you know, because that's the Four Noble Truths, right? I know the cause of samsara is ignorance and desire. The 3 higher trainings counteract that, because that's the path, and then there's the resultant, cessation of samsara, right? And so then you have that clear, like, so you have both though. You have that feeling like it's like a prison, and then you have that, right? And Lama Tsongkhapa says that there, right? So you have to have both in a way, because the feeling of the prison is like half of it, but the other half is the wanting something better. And that's where if you don't, and that's why the Dalai Lama often says that, like if you don't understand, if you haven't studied the Four Noble Truths, if you haven't studied the Lam Rim, if you don't know like what the 3 higher trainings are, then how do you really develop renunciation? Because it's like, you know, you don't know what to aim at. And then even if you realize samsara sucks, then it just becomes like, I don't know, depressing or something, or like existentialism or something like that. Right, where, because as existentialism recognized, oh wow, there's something horrible, but there's not a path to liberation. So you have to have both sides. That's why they teach the whole Four Noble Truths together, right? The two sets, like the cause and effect of samsara and the cause and effect of liberation. Because then you can develop realistic renunciation. So let's try that. So the page 189 are the praise. It starts the praises to the 21 Taras. And it's a few pages long. Well, let's read it once, and then we'll decide if we want to read it a couple more times or not, or something. But so this is I'll just make a reminder. So one is today's a Tara day, like, and it's also Sakadawa, so it's just good to do it. But it's like I think it's the 8th, I think, the Tibetan month. So in the 8th of the Tibetan month, they usually read advices. So we can dedicate it, like, especially because it's a more powerful time karmically right now, because it's the month of the Buddha's birth and so on. Like, and so as we recite it, we're praying to Tara. These are the 21 Taras, actually, right? We have Tanka, that Ani Tendril domain. So Tara is the female Buddha, right, of compassion. Actually, do people know her stuff? Like, I won't go into a lot of detail, but they say that she was like a practitioner at one time, right? And I guess like on her planet and time, as in our planet and time, there was some sexism or something. And so she was practicing, and then like she was, I think, like doing a lot of offerings and other practices, and then somebody said, and I think somebody said to her, something like, I think some foolish person said to her, maybe in a future life we were born as a guy or something, and she made a vow. She said like, that's so off that she made a vow, I'll always be reborn as a female, and even when in all my lifetimes, through this merit, may I be reborn as a woman and be a bodhisattva as a woman and achieve Buddhahood as a woman. And so if anybody ever doubts that women can achieve enlightenment, then they'll look at me and they won't have to doubt like that, That's one story of Tara, right? So she's like the female, one is that she's one of the many, and there are many female Buddhas, but she's one of them. But then also, they say that she's also particularly the embodiment, like Avalokiteshvara is Avalokiteshvara is, he's a male, usually depicted as male, but the Buddha of compassion. And they say that Tara is the female Buddha of active compassion, particularly. Like a compassion combined with a kind of active. And that's why if you see her picture there, she has one leg up and one leg down like this, like she's halfway getting up. And that it depicts how she combines sort of inner meditation with outer activity, and that they're inseparable. So she's always, in one sense, she's always in meditation, and yet at the same time she's active in benefiting beings. And Tibetans have great devotion to Tara. Actually Indian Buddhists too. Atisha, many Indian masters had great devotion and practice. She was one of their main practices. And then many Tibetan lamas, all Tibetan lamas actually that I never knew of, they all have a lot of, they all do practice of Tara. I don't know anybody who doesn't, actually. I don't think anybody. I think Khenchen Rinpoche once said, everyone who achieved enlightenment, all the great masters practiced Tara. He once said that. And so, and also Tara, she's active compassion. Also, though, she liberates from fear. That's one of her qualities. I forget what the whole list is. There are 8 different fears that she made a vow if anybody had them and prayed to her. Actually, Tenzin Bucho told you. You remember him when he was the translator? Do some of you guys know him? He once told me a funny story. He said he was in a place where he had he was in some place where he was like, you're supposed to go back to the monastery or something before sunset because the cobras come out. It was in India, and the cobras come out after sunset. And so he always went back early like that. And then he said, he told me this funny story that then one day he was like distracted or something, and so he didn't get back before he was supposed to when the cobras come out. And so then one of the fears that Tara liberates from is the fear of snakes. So he had to cross this field to get back to where he had to get to. And he was like, how am I going to get back there? But I can't stay out here all night. I got to. And so he thought, okay, I'm going to pray to Tara and I'm going to run like across that field as fast as I can. And so he was like saying, Tara, help me, Tara, help me. And he starts sprinting. And he's praying to Tara the entire time. He was telling the story. He's a really funny storyteller. He's like sprinting as fast as he can and praying to Tara, praying to Tara, praying to Tara. And then like he got through the gate to get into the place, and he was like praying to Tara, and then he was like in his back of his mind he was thinking Tara did it. Nothing bad happened. And then he stopped praying to Tara, and he said as soon as he stopped praying, he was like just inside the gate. He looked down, and this cobra went and opened its head. And he was like, Tara! He was okay. he said I shouldn't have stopped. I stopped too soon or something. He was a good story. He's a really funny guy. He's a great translator too. But so Tara liberates from many different fears. But ultimately she liberates from the fear of samsara is the point, right? So she's really, and so she has, then in this particular prayer she manifests in 21 different forms to help 21 different kinds of problems or something like that. And sometimes Lama Zopa gives it, there's an initiation of all 21 Taras. But there's one verse at the end, I think, that Atisha wrote, that Tara sometimes would appear to people, like in visions. So she appeared to Lama Atisha, the Indian master, and gave him teachings. And she was actually the one who told him to go to Tibet. Tara said, the Tibetan people need you, and she went. So I think in our time, I mean, Tara has always been inspiring, but I think in our time also it's quite inspiring. Especially because there are so many good female practitioners. Okay, so let's do it once and then decide if we want to do it more times or something. So we'll start on page 189. We'll read there are two like initial verses and then the actual praises. So. And by the way, in this first verse where it says, your sublime abode at the Patala, Patala is the pure land of Avalokiteshvara, so that the Tara and Avalokiteshvara, in some celestial symbolic sense, abide in this Patala, pure land. So the Patala palace that the Dalai Lama has in Tibet, that was named after, because he's supposed to be the emanation of Avalokiteshvara. So then he named his palace, or they named his palace, the Patala, after the Pure Land that so Avalokiteshvara lives in the celestial Pure Land, and the Dalai Lama's home is named after that, which kind of makes sense. So, from your sublime abode at the Potala, O Tara, born from the green letter Tam, your crown adorned with Amitabha, action mother of the Buddhas of the 3 times, Tara, please come with your attendants. The gods and demigods bow to your lotus feet, O Tara, you who rescue all who are destitute. To you, Mother Tara, I pay homage. Om, I prostrate to the noble transcendent liberator. Homage Tara, swift heroic, eyes like lightning, instantaneous, front opening stamens of the Lord of three-world tear-born lotus. Homage he who face combines 100 autumn moons at fullest, blazing with light rays resplendent as 1,000-star collection. Homage golden blue on lotus, water-born and hand adorned, giving effort, calm, austerities, patience, meditation, her sphere. Homage crown of Tathagatas, actions triumph without limit, relied on by conqueror's children, having reached every perfection. Homage filling with Tutari, whom desire direction in space, being with her feet the 7 worlds, able to draw forth all beings. Homage worshipped by the All-Lords, Shakna, Agni, Brahma, Maru, honored by the hopes of spirits, corpse raisers, Gandharvas, Yakshas. Homage with her tread, pay sounds, destroy lane foes' magic diagrams, her feet pressing, left out riding, blazing in a raging fire blaze. Homage Turi, very dreadful, destroyer of Mara's champions, she with frowning lotus visage, who is slayer of all enemies. Homage at her heart or fingers, adorn her with 3-jewel mudra, light masses all excited, all directions wheels adorn her. Homage she so joyous, radiant, crown emitting garlands of light, mirthful laughing with Tutari, subjugating Mara's devas. Homage she able to summon all earth guardians assembly, shaking, frowning with her home sign, saving from every misfortune. Homage crown adorned with crescent, Mulan ornaments most shining, Amitabha in her hair knot, sending out much light eternal. Homage she mid wreath ablaze like, eon-ending fire abiding, right stretched left bent joy surrounds you, troops of enemies destroying. Homage she who strikes the ground with her palm and with her foot beats it, scowling with her letter hum the 7 levels she does conquer. Homage happy, virtuous, peaceful, she whose field is peace nirvana, she endowed with Om and Swaha, destroyer of the great evil. Homage she with joy surrounded, tearing foes' bodies asunder, praised with hum and knowledge mantra, arrangement of the 10 letters. Homage True, which see letter, of the shape of syllable hum. 5-foot stamping shakes the three worlds, Meru, Narandar, and Vindhya. Homage holding in her hand the hair-marked moon of Deva lake form. With Thai spoken Tara and Pei, totally dispelling poison. Homage she whom gods and their kings and the Kinnaras do honor. Armed in on joyful splendor, she dispels bad dreams and conflicts. Homage she whose 2 eyes bright with radiance of sun and full moon. With twice Hara and Tutare, she dispels severe contagion. Homage full of liberating, power by set of the 3 natures, destroys hosts of spirits, yakshas, and raised corpses, supreme Ture. With these praises, with rune mantra, and prostrations, thus are 21. I'll make a couple quick comments. One is like, in terms of just, I don't know what it is, like archetypal images of the feminine. Isn't this a great, I think it's a great prayer, right? I mean, how she has the quality, I mean, the one verse is happy, virtuous, and peaceful, right? But then there's the other one with the, you know, she with frowning lotus visage who slays all enemies. So it's not, what's the word? I mean, she's clearly has different, she embodies different qualities of enlightened feminine energy or something. It's just, I think, cool. But maybe actually let's do at least one more. I'll say why. Like Pabonker Rinpoche actually, and you know, like for those of you who have read his like Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, Lam Rim, he uses the example of saying the 21 praises to Tara, and what he says is like, he says, you know, he's giving the example about karma, right? That karma depends on your motivation. And so he says, so if you pray to Tara, he says like if a worldly person prays to Tara wishing for, sometimes people pray to Tara, for example, if they want a child or if they want wealth or something. Right? And then he says, then actually there's not like, well, there was you make it wealth or you make it child, but it's not any virtuous karma actually, right? It's like not, you're not, I mean, there's some relationship to Tara, so maybe there's something good happening that way for you, but he says, but if you pray to Tara with bodhicitta, then the result is enlightenment. You know what I mean? So he gives an example there where he says like, you know, so if you're praying to Tara like, you know, may everything work out for me tomorrow, well that's not really, you know, it's not going to result in enlightenment. Even though you're praying to Tara who's enlightened, your motivation's not enlightening. So, but he says if you pray to Tara with bodhicitta, then the result is enlightenment. So, so maybe we can do one more, just to make sure we do it with bodhicitta is one thing, right? So wishing to achieve enlightenment for all beings. And then also, since like it's a good time, let's dedicate it also for there's like another good. So one is bodhicitta, but then the other dedication is dedicating for the Dharma to last long. So we can dedicate like that, and then for like all the wishes of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to be fulfilled. Because actually, if his wishes are fulfilled, that's the same as bodhicitta, right? Because his wish is for all beings to become enlightened. So it's easy. And then for Khenchen Rinpoche and Lama Zopa Rinpoche's like wishes to be fulfilled, and also for the center to succeed in benefiting beings. So anyway, those are all like for the Dharma to flourish, for beings to have be helped. But maybe we do one more with that, with all those like kinds of positive, making sure we do that. And we can just start on page 190 for the second one, because we already did the invocation. Oh, my prostrate to the noble transcendent liberator. Homage Tara, swift heroic, eyes like lightning, instantaneous, sprung from opening stamens of the Lord of Three Worlds, tear-born lotus. Homage he whose face combines 100 autumn moons at fullest, blazing with light rays resplendent as a 1,000-star collection. Homage golden bluest, loaded, bone and hand adorned, giving effort, calm austerities, patience, meditation, grace fear. Homage crown of Tathagatas, actions triumph without limit, relied on by conqueror's children, having reached every perfection. Homage filling with Tutare, whom desire direction and space, trampling with her feet the 7 worlds, able to draw forth all beings. Homage worshipped by the all-lords, Shakna, Agni, Brahma, Maru, honored by the hosts of spirits, corpse raisers, Gandharvas, Yakshas. Homage with her tray and pay sounds, destroying foes' magic diagrams, her phrases left out right in, blazing in a raging fire blaze. Homage to her very dreadful, destroyer of Mara's champions, she with frowning lotus visage, who is slayer of all enemies. Homage at our harder fingers, adorn her with 3-jeweled mudra, light rays masses all excited, all directions wheels adorn her. Homage she so joyous, radiant, crown emitting garlands of light, mirthful laughing with Tutare, subjugating Mara's devas. Homage she able to summon all earth guardians assembly, shaking frowning with her home sign, saving from every misfortune. Homage crown adorned with crescent, moon all ornaments most shining, Amitabha in her hair knot, sending out much light eternal. Homage she amid wreath ablaze like, eon ending, fire abiding, Christ let flesh bring joy surrounds you, troops of enemies destroying. Homage she who strikes the ground with her palm and with her foot beats it, scowling with her letter whom the 7 levels she does conquer. Homage happy, virtuous, peaceful, she whose field is peace nirvana, she endowed with Om and Svaha, destroyer of the great evil. Homage she with joy surrounding, tearing foes' bodies asunder, frees with hum and knowledge mantra, arrangement of the 10 letters. Homage to her woodsy letter, of the shape of syllable hum, by foot stamping shakes the 3 worlds, Meru, Mandara, and Vinja. Homage holding in her hand the hair-marked moon of Deva lake form, with thy spoken Tara and Pei, totally dispelling poison. Homage she whom gods and their kings, and the Kinnaras do honor, armored in all joyful splendor, she dispels bad dreams and conflicts. Homage she whose 2 eyes bright with radiance of sun and full moon, with twice Hara and Tutare, she dispels severe contagion. Homage full of liberating, power by set of the 3 natures, destroys hopes of spirits, yakshas, and raise corpses, supreme Ture. These praises with root mantras and prostrations thus are 21. Actually, let's turn to the next page and just read once this one. This is that verse that Lama Atisha heard, that Tara taught him directly. Just that one, it's like a brief version of the 21. So let's just read that verse one. Oh, my prostrate to the goddess, foe destroyer, liberating Lady Tara. Homage to Tari's saviors, heroine, with Tutare dispelling all fears, granting all benefits with Ture, to her with Soha I bow. I'm sorry to say about the stories of Tara. That first verse, right, where it says, homage Tara, swift heroic, eyes like lightning, instantaneous, sprung from opening stamens of the Lord of 3 worlds, tear-born lotus. That comes from another story. The story was that Avalokiteshvara, right, who had 1,000. There's a version of Avalokiteshvara who has 1,000 eyes, right, and 1,000 arms, and that's the emanation. That's the version of Avalokiteshvara that the Dalai Lama is supposed to be an emanation of, in a way. But so the story goes that because he's had the Buddha of compassion, right? So they say that one time he used to always crying to see the suffering of sentient beings. And since he had 1,000 eyes, there was a lot of tears, because you could cry more with 1,000 eyes. And so they say that his tears formed like a pool at his feet, because he was just like crying at the unbearable nature of the suffering of sentient beings. And they say that then, so what it says, sprung from an opening statements of the Lord of 3 worlds, tear-born lotus, right? So what happened was like out of that pool, a lotus rose up, and the lotus opened, and you see how Tara is like sitting on a lotus? So they say that the lotus sprung up from his tears, right, pool, and then Tara arose inside that lotus, and she said essentially something like, although the suffering of sentient beings is unbearable, I'll help you to alleviate the suffering of sentient beings. We'll work together, something like that. She was encouraging Avalokiteshvara, and they worked together and helped being. That is a nice story. And they both are. I guess they're both studied with the celestial guru Amitabha. So Amitabha is the 11th head of Avalokiteshvara is Amitabha, and then it says here her teacher was also Amitabha. So I guess they were like fellow students of Amitabha Buddha or something. So maybe should we take a short break, and then we'll meditate, because people want to meditate on the 12 links, right? So maybe we'll take a little break, and then we'll meditate on the 12 links of dependent arising. Stretch our legs first, though, or something.